This is Breaking the 180, the podcast where we look at every angle, shot, frame, and development in the world of cinema and occasionally other media. And this is part of our Chronicles of Mann, the big episode we've been promising for a while. I'm Elsie Renhefo.
And I'm Sebastian Carrasco. Welcome to episode 4 of the Chronicles of Mann. And, well, do we have a doozy today?
No introduction really needed, right? In a way, for our listeners.
That's true. Anything, everything Heat related, from the big screen
to the little screen,
to the video game screen.
Oh yeah,
we're here from it, to the literary screen.
The literary screen now.
You want to be making moves on the street, have no attachments, allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
In the city of Los Angeles.
Recognize the MO? MO is that they're good. If you think these guys are scoring once and passing through, I doubt it.
A relentless police detective is on the trail.
What do we got?
Of a master thief.
You're fugitive number 1 with a bullet. It's double the risk here.
You're wrong. It's 4 times the risk, and I'm double the worst trouble you ever had.
Clear!
For those who have been discovering Michael Mann through this series we've been doing, it might come as a surprise at first just how influential Heat has been over the last 28 years since the film premiered in 1995. I'll say right off the bat that since watching this film for the first time as a kid, I've always considered it my favorite cop thriller, let's say. And I don't think anyone has topped it in terms of the heist genre, at least since the 90s. Many have been the imitators, few have been even close to its equal.
If it's between you and some poor bastard whose wife you're gonna turn into a widow, brother, you are going down.
There's a flip side to that coin. What if you do got me boxed in, and I gotta put you down? Because no matter what, you will not get in my way. We've been face to face, yeah. But I will not hesitate. Not for a second.
Obsession, which in a way describes Michael Mann's career and the kinds of characters he writes.
Mann is the definition of the driven director. You sense an obsessive streak. Some may call it perfectionist, which definitely is appropriate for a director like Mann. But there is a special kind of obsessive drive in all his work. You always sense that this is an artist who is telling this story because something about it completely enveloped him and took over his thought process. And Heat is the most obvious of these films, or of this pattern in his filmmaking, starting with the fact that he shot the story, twice, and is now preparing, by all accounts, to shoot a sequel/prequel almost 30 years after the original. But before we quickly jump into the history of Heat as a TV film and then a film, I'll quickly point out that per Mann, the story that eventually became Heat was inspired by lunch he had with a real-life cop named Chuck Adamson, who, according to Mann, killed the real Neil McCauley in Chicago in 1963. Neil McCauley is, of course, the character played by Robert De Niro in the movie. Mann says, quote, Chuck told me about it in the late 70s or early 80s. What was most striking was that he'd met McCauley quite by accident. They'd had coffee together, and Chuck had respected the guy's professionalism. He was a really good thief, which is exciting to a detective, and he tried to keep any risks to a minimum. But at the same time, he was a cold-blooded sociopath who'd kill you as soon as look at you. So Mann, I'm actually not surprised at all, hangs out with cops. So one of his cop friends told him about this very, very impressive thief, this very impressive criminal, and that kicked off Mann's imagination, as tends to happen with a lot of writers. It's some encounter or some moment in real life that just all of a sudden plants the seed for a story that may just end up defining your work, which is the case with this movie.
And the idea that Mann himself has expressed in interviews and his audio commentaries for whatever of his films has them, which I highly recommend that anybody listen to, because even if you're not a fan of the movie, you'll grow to appreciate it even more. And why these characters feel so real and why they're in fact so interesting is he bases a lot of their personality on real people.
Yes, yeah.
Even going back to Thief.
Yeah.
It is quite an extraordinary feat to pull off what he does in Heat. He makes a movie that is so impactful in its imagery and its script and its performances and its visual language, right? That to this day, when someone makes a cop heist thriller, you'll hear them frequently say, well, we want to make our version of Heat. To this day, right?
Yeah.
28 years later.
And not just cop films, even we'll get into it later, but even superhero films have been touched by the influence of this movie.
I guess the first thing we'll do is just jump into the beginning.
Heat really begins as a TV movie titled L.A. Takedown.
Okay, what we got here is a heavy-duty crew. They are equipped to go in on the prowl. Start looking for recent Highline burglaries that have mystified us.
They're all over Chehalis and Cerrito. Their phones, their houses, their cars.
We got major problems here. We've been cut into. Who's on to us? LAPD, County, the G? Who?
Man's name is Hammond. First name Vincent. LAPD sergeant in robbery homicide.
Which premiered on television in the late 1980s. After this fateful meeting that Mann describes, he wrote the script for something. He was thinking maybe a TV series. He decided to try it out as a TV movie because he had several development deals going on with several networks. And the success of Miami Vice and also the show Crime Story had given him some clout in the TV world. So after Miami Vice was canceled, he decides to kind of, practice a little bit again with feature filmmaking and makes L.A. Takedown in 1989. Now, if you watch the movie, which we did, it's actually available on YouTube. So if you want to see the movie, it's not readily available on streaming in the United States or on DVDs, shockingly enough. But because we live in the digital age where anything can be found anywhere, some hero who we want to tip our hat to today has uploaded it on YouTube, so you can check it out there. What you get with LA Takedown is the basic skeleton of the Heat plot, where you have a detective in Los Angeles who's trying to juggle his devotion to his work with a relationship and a really intelligent, skilled criminal who simultaneously is trying to plan a big bank heist while also juggling meeting someone he becomes interested in but can't really tell them what he does for a living. And we also get in the TV movie, much less than in Heat, small windows into the components of his crew, into the other people involved in his crew of fellow criminals. As a TV movie, it still stands up in comparison to other late 80s, early 90s TV movies. Those of you who have dived into them or remember that time in TV history know that TV movies back then were really quickies that were just kind of knocked out to fill in a space on network TV at night. But because it's Michael Mann, you start seeing him revving up for the kinds of shots we see in Heat, where LA becomes this glossy yet gritty battleground for these detectives and criminals, and you get poetic shots of palm trees and flames, and the dialogue gets really intense and sometimes even a little metaphysical. And it's not just your average cop chasing after a robber. It's like obsessed men whose lives are defined by these choices, and if they were to do anything else, they would die. And it's much shorter than Heat. Obviously, it's what, like an hour and.
It's about an hour and 15.
Yeah,
but it is
really
it
just an hour and 15.
About something like that.
And it just flew by though, because that's Michael Mann.
That's Michael Mann. He's the pacing master.
Yeah.
But LA Takedown is so fascinating because while doing research for Heat, I thought, okay, it's just going to be Heat light, right? We know what Heat is. This is just an inferior version of it. But I think what Alice just mentioned, it's the skeleton of Heat, but it is a fascinating watch on its own.
Yeah.
It's familiar but so different.
It stands up.
And it shows you how much casting makes the feel of a movie.
Alex MacArthur plays a criminal named Patrick McLaren, who will later be in Heat, Macaulay, played by Robert De Niro, and Scott Plank plays Vincent Hanna, who of course will still have the same name, but will be played by Al Pacino in the movie. And these guys are very well cast. I mean, they really carry the TV movie, with intensity. They've got this,
but a different kind of intensity, which is what, again, is so fascinating. We're making a comparison of not why Heat is better, and I suppose in subjective terms, yes, in terms of cinematography, editing, all this stuff, because it has the weight of, a major studio behind it. But much like Jericho Mile, which is very clearly a TV movie, Mann doesn't see LA Takedown as, just a TV production. It's like, let's use every penny to make this as cinematic as we can with the constraints of cable TV.
It's almost a precursor to what we now call peak TV. This idea of TV shows that aspire to a cinematic quality and scale. I mean, a bit of fun trivia as well for you film buffs tuning in. Michael Rooker is also in LA Takedown. So Mike really gets around. He's in this one, and he's actually makes perfect sense. He's got the right look and tone to be in a Michael Mann production. And yes, you really feel LA Takedown. I would even compare it to a proof of concept or a short film. Like when people make a short film about a bigger idea they have, but they don't quite have the resources yet to do the full project, they'll find some way to at least do a smaller take. And LA Takedown is that. One great comparison I think that can instantly be made is the opening heist of LA Takedown is almost like a shot-for-shot blueprint for that first armored car robbery in Heat. The shots are kind of the same. The editing rhythm follows the same pattern. The close-ups of the criminals in the armored car driving is also almost identical, including the ski masks they wear.
And the dialogue. And isn't that so fascinating, too? Because unlike Mann's other projects, especially his film projects, LA Takedown to Heat Pipeline, it's probably one of the biggest windows into Mann's thought process we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because between the two films, you can tell what Mann felt really comfortable with, what he really liked in his original draft, but just wanted to add a little bit of shine to it.
Yeah.
And what things he wanted to improve, or change the tone of. Because when I say improve, it's not necessarily because something was bad, but maybe the tone, the atmosphere doesn't quite fit your second crack at it.
Yeah.
Including the famous coffee scene.
Oh, yes. In the TV movie, it's interesting, but so condensed. And of course it is, because, man, we don't know all the fine details yet, but, you know, when it comes to, especially in the 90s and the 80s, TV production was even more constrained than now, because you really had to even write your script conscious of commercial breaks, how much time was allotted on network TV. Whereas today, as everybody knows, you can stream a show, and one episode will be an hour, the next one might be 48 minutes, the one after that will be an hour and 30, because the showrunner, for whatever reason, decided those episodes had to be those lengths. Well, after LA Takedown premieres on TV, and you know, doesn't really make much of a, it doesn't really grab that much attention on television, and people would discover it later because of Heat. Mann then went on to make The Last of the Mohicans, and after the big success of The Last of the Mohicans, he finally gears up to do Heat, with one of the decade's most famous casting choices, in that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro had been featured in major films together before. And no need to remind everyone that they're both in The Godfather Part 2, but they never acted together in the same movie. So this is the first film where these two big screen giants are literally pitted against each other in a movie. And so Pacino would play Hannah, and Robert De Niro would play Macaulay, the thief. And instantly, anyone who at the time had been following this director's career could see that Heat is a culmination of everything that Mann has ever wanted to say in many ways. Before we dive into the intricacies of the film, you know, I'll say this might even explain why his output after this movie becomes a curious mixture of hits and misses. Maybe it's because, I don't want to say he hit his peak with Heat, because after Heat he would still release The Insider, which is just another great movie,
and Public Enemies,
you know. But there's something special about Heat as almost a defining statement of Mann's work, and this is why Heat remains influential. Well, even his later movies, like Public Enemies, still prove that he could still keep on making great films,
and why most people know Heat, but might not know Mann's other filmography. I would say if you asked most people on the street, they would probably mention Heat. If you're lucky, maybe Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
And Thief or Manhunter. That might be the extent of just an everyday viewer.
Or even the big film buffs, I would think. Those are like the main films. I don't even think they know much about The Keep.
No, not at all. And I don't know, there's just something that I think is so fascinating for exploring any filmmaker and trying to really break down how and why one of their films has stayed in the cultural zeitgeist for as long as it has, and with the same intensity as when it first released. Why people, for all intents and purposes, are still obsessed with the movie, and why we have video games and TV miniseries and direct-to-video movies and other high-profile films trying to rekindle some of that, be inspired by it. I mean, Michael Mann even wrote a prequel sequel to Heat titled Heat 2, which will now be adapted into a feature.
Published last year in 2022.
He's never made a sequel to any of his films before.
He's never written a book before. So his first book happens to be a Heat continuation and prequel, both in one. In terms of the film's impact, I'll quickly start by saying that I think it boils down to the initial impact of the movie and why it's been copied so much is pop culture is defined so much by aesthetic. And when Heat premiered in 1995, it looked unlike any other heist movie that had ever been made in terms of its sheer style and tone. It has this dreamy neon sort of photography with the pacing of a serious art film, but yet at the same time it has the grit of a dynamic crime picture. And even the way the characters are presented, they almost have infectious styles to them. Pacino's cop, Vincent Hanna, right, is not your run-of-the-mill LA detective. He's a snappy, stylishly dressed guy who chews bubblegum like he's on coke, which according to Mann and Pacino is part of the character's made-up backstory for the performance, that he's sniffing a bit of coke on the side. So these are very compelling, dynamic, charismatic characters, including De Niro as a very quiet, calculating criminal who is so meticulous. He goes to the bookstores to buy books on metals to prepare his next heist. And there's a wonderful book, which we were just discussing before recording, called The Cinema of Michael Mann by this film professor, Stephen Rybin. And he makes an interesting point early in his chapter on Heat, which connects to what I just said. He said that this is one of the first movies that really shows criminals also as high-class players, as guys who aren't striving to steal to get rich. They're already rich. When we meet them, they're already living very well and eating together at lavish restaurants. There's many allusions to how they all have enough money to front their operations. Some of them are into real estate. Some of them have bail bonds. They're all very well organized businessmen who just happen to feed that business by stealing. And that was very uncommon at the time. Most criminal films, it's like the down and out guy trying to just, steal to make that big hit.
And one of the brilliant aspects about what he's doing here, which is peppered in his other films and you would see revisited most definitely in Miami Vice and Public Enemies, is that, yes, Macaulay and his gang are outliers in a certain sense, but they're also the core DNA of Los Angeles.
Yes.
That they are presented precisely as everyday, well, not working class. They probably started as working class, but just everyday players who happen to rob armored cars and banks, right?
Also, you could see these guys eating on Montana Street and not be the wiser. Like, you wouldn't know what they actually do.
Well, even if you did, it's like, oh yeah, that's their job.
Yeah,
that's their 9 to 5. And it's an excellent point that you just made, quoting from Rybin's book, that yes, seeing the criminal element as outliers, even in Thief, is very interesting.
Yeah.
But this is kind of the first time in a mainstream movie you're seeing it presented in a way that's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, because even in Thief, James Caan has, he has wealth and has a reputation, right, as being a good thief, but he's kind of a lone wolf operator who still is hired out by others. And that movie eventually culminates with this plot involving this big gangster who's trying to essentially force him to become his employee. In Heat, the criminals in the story are their own bosses. You know, they call their own shots. They run the operation themselves without any outside interference. And anyone they collaborate with, it's on an equal basis.
Well, let's put it this way. They own the store, not the storefront.
Exactly. Which, of course, makes them tougher to catch, which is why Hannah becomes also so obsessed with cornering them, because they operate with a facade of legitimacy. Yeah, that's why this really sweet girl who works at the library, at the bookstore, approaches Macaulay at a coffee shop, because he really just looks like your average professional flipping through a book.
Just a 9-to-5 job. The gray suits and well put together. In fact, Macaulay seems more stable than Hannah.
Yes, yes.
And before this completely slips my mind, this is another excellent case of we don't ever get anyone's backstory in this movie. Everything you need to know about them is in the movie, but you do know that there's a history before and after the movie ends, except for some of the characters for obvious reasons. And even in Heat 2, which serves as a prequel, it's an origin story, sort of. You're not getting an origin story of the characters per se, but you're getting a bit of background on why they became so tight-knit and so professional.
Yeah.
Why they won't make the same mistakes of their past. Why they try and control as much of the world as they can. And in both the novel and the movie, what makes it so fascinating is that sometimes, even if you are the most professional, highest standard artist in the world, there's always that one element that you can't control.
Yes, there's a funny similarity there with David Fincher's recent The Killer. Two completely different stories, two completely different styles of filmmaking, but it's that fascination with the criminal as perfectionist, the rogue living outside of the law as a meticulous craftsman. And that's why I love how in Heat, Mann lingers on those small details where instead of introducing the criminals here as, I don't know, hard-partying, outlaws, he opens with Val Kilmer buying supplies at a hardware store like any other guy or person who's going to go do some construction work during the day or is remodeling the house. And then it dawns on us that, he's buying supplies to carry out a heist. These are not people who even carry around the exaggerated guns or weapons of popcorn action movies. They plan their heists by going into a warehouse with very meticulous tools to then drill through holes. And like you see in Thief, the manipulation of phone lines and alarms and all these things. It's very, very much about how crime for them is as serious as being a banker or being an investment salesman. I mean, it's very, very meticulous.
It's an artistry. And what's so funny is the way you're describing them reminds me of this iconic video game series called Hitman.
Oh, yeah.
Which it's about a hitman, but what makes the character so interesting is despite knowing very little about him, he is the ultimate assassin. And even though he doesn't speak very much, you get the sense that he treats this profession like a craftsman right? Someone who makes swords or a table.
Yes.
This individual is at the peak of what they do, and maybe they don't even see themselves as like a master, but they know that it'll be very hard for people to emulate them.
Well, it's fascinating because they all have a code of conduct. Timothy Oliphant was in the movie, right? They made that
the first
the
one,
movie.
and then they made a second one with some other guy I don't remember.
I
They're not
remember
very good,
yeah.
but it is fascinating, right? How crime, heists, assassinations are treated with not nonchalance and not quite apathy, but I suppose the word is professionalism. It's a
seriousness,
a job just like any other.
Yeah, like seriousness. They have codes of conduct, even, right? So,
and the way money is transferred,
yes.
it's not seen as out of place.
It's one thing I loved about, for example, The Sopranos. How it's very funny how these are ruthless gangsters, but they talk in terms of percentages and points and charging people points. And there's these great scenes.
Same with The Wire.
The Wire as well. They know how to talk about crime in the way, you talk about any business transaction, compounded interest, and all these terms like that, etc. And in Heat, it's the same thing. Macaulay, for example, has, during the famous coffee shop scene with Pacino, he tells him that one of his, and he mentions this quote earlier in the movie, that a guy he knew, a mentor really, like another criminal, told him,
"Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner."
Pacino just looks at him and responds, like, can you really do that? And De Niro says, well, that's the discipline. That's how he sees his work. That's the devotion he sees to his work. And while watching the movie again, I was even thinking of the funny parallel between, or the funny comparison you can make between these men and even artists, right? A lot of artists, whether successful or not, struggle with balancing the desires for a normal, homely life with the dedication and obsession that their chosen craft demands. When Pacino, there's a great scene where Pacino comes back home after having gone to a crime scene where a prostitute's body has been found, and Pacino as Vincent Hanna, right? Hannah's wife basically chastises him in a subtle way because she made dinner 4 hours ago and he never showed up, and now he's shown up and the dinner's cold. And I can see that same argument or that same tension happening with someone trying to direct films, do music, and if your partner is not involved in the same line of work, it's very difficult. I imagine it's the same thing for people in the medical field who are on call 24/7 in the ER. So you get that sense of and the same thing with De Niro. De Niro's character, Macaulay, has to constantly dance around how much to tell this girl, Edie, that he's seeing. I mean, he claims he's a salesman, but then he has to explain, why he wants to pop in all of a sudden late at night. I also love the small detail how Macaulay's apartment, well, not apartment, he has a lavish home by the sea, has no furniture. That's a great detail. I noticed while watching the movie again last night. Val Kilmer crashes in his home because Val Kilmer's character is having problems with his wife because of his gambling problems, and he's part of Macaulay's crew. So he's crashing on the floor, and he's like, you need to get some furniture. And De Niro's like, I'll get around. I haven't gotten around to it. That's how enveloped by work these guys are, that Macaulay is so defined by what he does as a heistman that he does not have he doesn't even care about spending the money on lavish furniture for his house. I don't even see a TV in there.
Barely.
Yeah.
And you just brought up Val Kilmer. And I think Val Kilmer's character is so interesting in this movie. Because in a way, he has the most humanity of everybody in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, it opens, he crashes with Macaulay because he's having marital spats. But unlike Macaulay, he is having marital spats. He has a home life that he's dealing with, and he's clearly in love with this woman, Charlene, who you see throughout the film.
Played by Ashley Judd, back when she was nearing her, well, she's always been a really good actress, but at the time she was kind of like in Jennifer Lawrence, next big ticket mode.
And how he's balances work with a home life, and where that leads to at the end of the movie. Macaulay shows what happens when you've completely detached yourself from that human part of your being in order to become the apex predator or the master of your craft. Val Kilmer's character is still very good at what he does, but you can tell he has more potential in him that he doesn't want to follow through with because he needs that sense of normalcy, even if that normalcy is very tumultuous.
Same thing with another character who's not explored as much, but you get the same feel of is Tom Sizemore, who plays another member of the crew. And he, too, has a wife and lives very well. And there's a pivotal scene where they have to choose. The crew has to decide if they're going to go through with their big heist. And Macaulay looks at Tom Sizemore, De Niro looks at Tom Sizemore and says, well, I mean, your wife takes very good care of you, and you have real estate and some kind of bonds. I have no idea what these financial terms mean, but he's like, you have all this stuff. You don't have to do this. And Tom Sizemore really has to think about it for a sec. And then he says, well, for me, the action is the juice. And they go through with it. But yeah, it's almost like everyone around Macaulay is yearning for that sort of domestic life that they can afford to a very good degree through the crimes they commit. But he's only now barely seeing the potential of this with the bookstore worker and graphic designer he meets, Edie, who is played by Amy Brennan. I don't know if some of you remember Amy Brennan. She used to be in a lot more stuff back then, also in the 90s.
She was in The Leftovers.
She was in The Leftovers, yeah. If you want to,
excellent performance in that show.
Excellent
may or
show.
may not cover one day. We already have a mile-long list of things to do.
But check it out. It's on Max.
But yeah, this balance between everything. Again, what makes it so fascinating is this is ultimately a film about a work personal life balance, except the work is so addicting.
Yeah.
Robbing these banks, which this crew has been doing for 20, maybe 25, 30 years forever.
Well, because I think a theme in the film that came up while I was watching it again is this pressure one feels in life to sometimes settle for jobs that can even be just soul-crushing, but we have to get by, right? We have to survive. That's why that's the whole point of looking for a job when and of course all of us have dream jobs and careers we'd like to establish, but there are moments in life where you just kind of have no choice. And the perfect example of that is another character who's very interesting. Mann just peppers this film with side characters that don't take up a lot of space, but somehow he still makes them compelling. So, for example, Donald, who's played by the actor Dennis Haysbert in, a very memorable role as this former crew member of Macaulay's who just got out of jail and through his parole officer gets a just really shitty job at a restaurant kitchen with just the world's most asshole boss. Yeah, he comes in saying he's a good grill man, but this jerk is like, "Oh yeah, well, good for you. You got to, clean the toilets, take out the trash." And yeah.
And by the way, I'm taking half your wages. If you have a problem with that, you're shit out of luck.
Yeah, exactly. I'll accuse you of this and that, to your parole officer. And later on, when Macaulay approaches him in the kitchen and offers him the chance to go on this big bank heist they're going to do, part of you is thinking, don't do it, because you're about to commit a very serious crime here. Another part of you empathizes and thinks, well, I mean, yeah, who wants to be in that kitchen for their whole life?
Well, that's a really interesting observation, because one thing maybe not enough people give Michael Mann credit for is he's very class conscious.
Yes, very much so.
All his movies. And Thief, which for me is one of his best, is the most overt.
Yeah.
But his little commentary there on, which has only become more relevant now. I mean, I was just reading an article that now people are, and bear with me with this is like kind of blew my mind, are renting half of their bed because of the rent crisis around the United States. Half of their bed, not even the apartment.
Oh my
half
God.
of their bed.
So is it like two people rent the same bed?
Correct, because things are so expensive.
So okay, people. So we're going back to the Middle Ages now. We're just all little paupers.
Exactly with that character, yes, he got out of prison, out of jail, and he's on parole, and he's trying to go legit. The systems and the society within Los Angeles, he's never going to have any upward momentum, or the chances of him having any sort of momentum are very unlikely and will be absolutely grueling and soul-crushing.
Well, he's already tagged as a felon, and we both don't have records, but I do know that once you have a record, getting a job becomes even quadruple the as hard as it is for someone without a record. So this guy, Mann really makes him empathetic. He doesn't just portray him as like this ex-con, who's out in the streets and the bros are coming back to put him in the heist.
Well, he's simply addicted, which he could be, but this is an actual sense of freedom, ironically enough.
It's kind of like the famous final episode of Breaking Bad, right? Which I think we can all agree is another offspring of Heat, which Vince Gilligan himself has acknowledged he's a fan of Heat, the creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan. But there's that great scene in the final episode where Walter just tells his wife that, he did what he did, becoming a meth producer and trafficker, because he felt for the first time in his life alive. He actually felt like he was living. And you see that in that great scene in Heat where Macaulay just tells this guy, yes or no, you have to tell me right now. And there's that great shot of the guy just standing there as the grill starts burning. And he's kind of just realizing, you see it in his face. It's such good acting. You see it in his face. He just stands there thinking, what is my life in this place right now? And he goes on the heist. The same is true for everyone else in the movie, I think, because during the coffee shop scene, Macaulay says,
I don't know how to do anything else.
Neither do I.
I don't much want to either.
Neither do I.
They both don't want to give up these careers that not only pay their bills, but let them live out their obsessions, their passions.
But I think what makes the film so particularly interesting to me, characters like Macaulay and Hannah, in other films, their downfall or what would cause them problems on a personal level would be addiction to drugs or gambling. I mean, Val Kilmer's character is a gambling addict. But in this case, or hookers or something, even in great TV and movies, it's always in there.
Yeah.
But in this one, it's literally the obsession with their work that will cause the problem. That is both their world, but also their downfall.
Yes. Also because, tragically, they do have other choices. They just don't want to take them, right? So,
or they refuse to see them for what they are.
Exactly. They refuse to even accept the situation. Hannah it's just not in him to comprehend that he's just, or maybe he does, but he's become nihilistic about it in the sense that he knows he's never going to have a functioning marriage carrying on the way he carries on with his work as a detective. But he just can't. He couldn't live with himself if he stopped hunting down guys like Macaulay.
He's an apex predator. That's what they do.
And
that is what they do.
And Macaulay can't give up taking down scores despite liking Edie a lot. He brings up the idea of them running off together. But you sense that even if they run off, he's somehow going to just fall back into it wherever they go, because it's who he is.
Well, it's his performance, and I mean performance as in character performance. De Niro as Macaulay, it's like he's trying to feel and understand what it's like to have, I suppose, for lack of a better word, a normal life.
Yeah.
But when you're watching the movie throughout the whole time, you just get the feeling that he's never going to be comfortable in a world like that. He might have a glimpse of feeling something different, but it's just him trying a new skill, so to speak.
No, yeah, that is what it is. And I think, and this is one of the good things about the complexity of the script, I think with Edie, I think they have nothing, they're totally incompatible. They have nothing in common. I just think it's because he's getting a feeling of something, the comfort of a relationship. So that's why he's trying to stay with this girl without realizing that even if they were to end up together forever, it's not like she's going to ever really adjust to what he is, because she's not that. The same way Hannah, I think, keeps also choosing women that you can see why Hannah's own wife may appeal to him. She's played with this great sense of strength, right, and presence. But it's, in their case, it's almost two chemicals that are too similar to each other, so they can't necessarily mix or they'll explode. Because the same way he's serious about his job as a detective to an obsessive degree, she also wants someone serious to be her husband. She's very serious about having a decent home, especially because of her, she has this daughter played by Natalie Portman and one of her first early roles.
I was about to say, the tragedy is that in this dynamic, the ultimate loser will be Natalie Portman's character.
Yes.
And in Heat 2, Mann hints at how much this relationship did impact Natalie Portman's character.
Yeah. We don't want to spoil too much because you want to read the book, and it's very well written.
And we're going to get to it.
Oh, we'll get to it. Don't worry. Yeah. We'll get to the book. Remember, this is our big episode that we've been promising for so long. So after you listen to this whole episode, you'll be so sick of Heat, you're gonna go watch it again, and you're gonna go read the book. So, Mr. Mann, if you notice an uptick in sales around the month of December,
you're welcome.
You're welcome, and it's not just because of Ferrari; it's also because of this podcast. And it's a good way to segue into how all of these themes work within what visually is really Mann's signature film. It has one of the best collaborations of director and DP, I think, of the 90s, because Mann's directing with Dante Spinotti's look, those together really establish the style of the film. We were just talking about this deep content in the writing, but just on a superficial level, what Spinotti and Mann did together really established a palette, a look that has just lingered. And after Heat, that's when you really get a sense of what defines Mann visually and sonically, and we'll get into that in a bit. But visually, Mann's movies before Heat, his visual richness was always there. His eye for composition was always there.
And how contemporary the movies feel.
Yeah.
I mean, even going back to Manhunter, which is both very 80s but still feels very contemporary, Mann and Spinotti have a way of leaving a lasting impact with their films. I mean, what's so striking is you watch Heat and there's some dead giveaways, obviously, the technology of the time. But even then, this still looks like a movie made a year ago about 1995.
Yes, and that lighting that Spinotti achieves in Heat. And it's interesting because Spinotti shot Manhunter for Mann, and it's a great film and a great-looking movie. But Heat in particular, the shots in Heat, the way L.A. is filmed, the way the images are put together, has been aped by so many directors. So many directors have tried to capture this look. The one example I would give is if you see films, for example, like Den of Thieves or Wrath of Man, these shots, those drone shots or those over-the-head shots you get of an armored truck or a cop car just going up a street in some urban setting with neon lighting and intense music playing, or a kind of melancholic drone playing. That's all from Michael Mann. That's all taken from.
And those aren't even the closest when we talk about the aesthetics. I mean, some of the big ones we got to talk about, The Town, The Dark Knight, might be the two most direct influences, or let's say films inspired so very directly to Heat.
Exactly.
Color palette, shot composition. Hell, the way the respective cities are shot. One major character in all of Mann's films, but you really start to see it particularly starting in Heat. How he makes the cities he's filming in so vital to the story being told.
Yes. Heat is one of the great L.A. movies of the 90s. The city really becomes a full character. And it's something he would return to later with Collateral in 2004.
Which, interestingly enough, will be our next film we talk about in our Chronicles of Mann series, and
Yes.
how we structure our last episode in the retrospective.
Yes. Yes, so definitely stay tuned for that. In Collateral, L.A. is also a character. That one is more of a tour of L.A.,
but it also feels so different.
Yes, more because it really goes into the nooks and crannies of the city.
The seediness.
Yeah. And it goes into like every little corner of L.A. Heat. L.A. is more of like a great frame for what's going on. It's more of a great background. It's
a
moving.
Canvas.
It's a canvas. Yes, absolutely. It's a great canvas for these characters to walk around in and chase each other around, basically. And you get these small little details like, I love how Mann lingers on the little things. Like there's a scene where Hannah and his team are doing surveillance on Macaulay's crew as they're walking out of an expensive restaurant, and they're all waiting to meet they're all waiting for the valet to bring their cars. Little details like that gives you a sense of the LA nightlife. And then Hannah will go meet one of his contacts, one of his informers, in some godforsaken corner of one of the outskirts of LA where you have these really dicey neighborhoods. So it's a very great portrait of LA, where you also see the diversity of the city, as you also see in Collateral. You get a sense of a city where there's Latinos, where there's Asians, where there's whites. Hannah will go look for someone in a Mexican neighborhood, but then he's meeting another contact at a nightclub that looks frequented by a lot of Black Americans and teens. So you really get like that sense of the diversity of the city, which you don't get. And you know what? It's grounded. It's not some exaggeration of L.A. that was so common in the 90s in movies like 187 or Training Day, where L.A. is it's either a glossy Hollywood fantasy or it's a
caricature,
or it's
just like way over the top,
Cholo Battleground or something,
and it's really great you brought up that point, because that's another huge aspect of filmmaking. How do you make something feel real but engaging? How do you find that balance? 50-50, 64? How do you make a city feel, if you're going to shoot it in Los Angeles as it is now or when you shot it? I mean, Los Angeles is still very much the same, but also changed in terms of the landscape. And I don't know. I think that's one of the, I guess, or elements of the secret sauce for the Mann style.
Yeah.
Everyone, all the side characters and extras, they feel real. The spaces feel real because they are.
And one editing technique I noticed in Heat is how Mann sustains the shot to let you get a sense of the place. For example, when they do the first armored car robbery at the beginning, the armored car tips over, and he just holds the shot long enough to even let you see one of these, what do they call those hanging strands that car dealerships put over their light poles, just drip down and fall on the floor. He just holds it so you can just see that and get enough of a sense of that, of the place we're in. And it's the same with other shots in the movie, including the famous bank heist. He gives you enough scope and space to see where you're at in the city, in the story, in that moment. It's a wonderful attention to detail. Or, it could even be, what's that great scene where Vincent Hanna kicks a TV out of his car?
Oh, yes.
And the people waiting for the bus that he kicks the TV in front of look like the actual people you see in LA any day waiting for the bus at a bus stop. So the city feels real in this movie. It's not La La Land.
And also more, I think there's more layers to even just that. I think it plays into the idea of apex predators. Where everything is taking place is specifically taking place there because this is where Macaulay and Hannah strategized.
Yes.
So you also get a sense of how they're thinking with the armored car heist, which, if anyone has played GTA 5, there's literally a heist which is exactly the same from shots to setup and everything. Yeah. We'll get to that when we talk about video games. But you also get a sense of, Macaulay's crew picked this at this underpass because there won't be cameras, and then you see the exits without them over-explaining. They never really explain their heists too much. You just see them unfold in a way where you get it.
Yes.
You see the visual language, you see where they are, you see how they escape.
Exactly. There's an actual sense of geography, but again, it's all grounded. Even the famous bank heist shootout when they have the big street battle.
You know what? Let's just jump into that now.
It's so well shot. It's so well edited. But Mann, I was going to point out, famously was, they were going to do the typical thing where they sound mix later on the gunshots and the machine gun fire to make it sound really strong. Mann liked the actual sound of the on-set weapons they were using, that he decided to keep that sound because it sounds more like an actual gun, like an actual weapon being fired.
And that comes down to location because the bank heist happens in the financial district. So you're basically in this giant corridor with these steel and glass skyscrapers. So the shots coming from their rifles really echoes.
Yes, they really resound. If you've ever been in downtown LA, you can believe it. Well, and famously enough, we'll get into that in a bit, but in 1997, there was an actual heist that seemed very much inspired by Heat. Now, if you watch LA Takedown, it's actually interesting to see how Mann kind of had the structure of the shootout already planned out. Some of the shots, some of the bank is different. It's in a different corner of LA. But the nature of the shootout when Hannah arrives and sees Macaulay walking out and then they start, this street battle with AK-47s was similar in LA Takedown. He just gives it better scope and detail and tension. So that's why LA Takedown is it's almost like a great student film blueprint for the bigger thing. But again, because of Mann's elegance and his combination of grit and elegance, it's a dynamic scene in Heat, but it's also not gratuitous. It's not shot like some kind of crazy manic Michael Bay production.
Meets Eli Roth. Or, you know what? Ambulance.
Yeah.
I bet you Ambulance was inspired by Heat, that crazy, wacky movie.
Oh, the bank heist in
and that Michael Bay, of course, turned into Michael Bay. But one thing that we wanted to talk about in particular, which is why so many movies inspired by Heat don't work, is precisely because they didn't understand what Heat was trying to do.
Yeah.
For example, the idea of the realistic gunfight, right? That the bank heist. I mean, it's 15, 20 minutes of the movie. It's quite intense. And people think, if you just, shoot the guns for real, obviously with blanks, that's what makes it interesting. And much like we've talked about in other episodes, yes, shooting something for real is fantastic, and you really have to have a tenacity, obsession, particular mind to make that happen. But you're still making a film, not a documentary.
And
why Heat works and what makes Heat so special and ultimately rises above many of these other films, it's not really a plot-driven movie. And what do I mean by that? Yes, every film has a plot, but a lot of bank heist movies are driven exclusively about an intricate plot that has characters do just enough to make that happen. Heat is actually a character-driven movie.
All the way.
That propels the plot. It's the characters' motivations. The shootout in Heat, why it's so tense, why it's controlled anarchy, is because when things go wrong, you follow each and every one of Macaulay's crew in how they react and respond to the situation happening, with, of course, this pinball called Hannah moving around trying to take down as many people as he can. That's what makes it so interesting and so visually and, in a way, emotionally resonant.
Well, because the shootout is a culmination of everyone's decisions, right, of everyone's choices.
Including Waingro, who we have to talk about in a few minutes.
We definitely got to talk about Waingro. Great performance in this movie as the ultimate scumbag in the crew. Waingro, of course, is played by Kevin Gage as this guy who joins the crew at the beginning of the movie and kills a police officer during the initial armored car robbery heist, and that makes Robert De Niro kick him out of the crew. And so he essentially becomes an antagonist for De Niro for the rest of the film, but not in a bombastic way. More of a looming threat in the background.
True psycho.
Yes, but the shootout, yes, it's not a point A to point B moment in the movie. It's really just a culmination of everyone's choices now coming to an explosive climax from which no one will be left the same. Vincent sees some of his comrades go down. Some of his colleagues are killed, while Macaulay and his crew just end up all over the 6 o'clock news.
Which is the one thing, if there's, they shot through plan A through W, them being on the news is the one thing they swore would never happen.
Exactly.
And now it's finally happened.
Yes, they have made the ultimate slip. It's the ultimate version of the perfectionist stepping into a puddle that they can't get out of. And the movie sustains a wonderful sense of melancholy throughout. It does not turn into... A lesser director would have then followed that heist sequence with some kind of daring escape plot and, Macaulay hopping on a plane to Mexico and then...
hijacking a plane and...
Yeah.
But that would have been plot first. And I think what we're ultimately hinting at is that Mann gives the characters, and then by association, the story, genuine pathos.
Yes. It really becomes... Again, it really becomes almost a wonderful kind of L.A. Greek tragedy, right? Where so many... The characters are now left in the wake of the bloodshed reflecting on, well, what choices they could have made before, but at the same time, there's no escape. They have to make new choices now, and some that will reverberate forever and some that just won't be able to be taken back. And when we get into the novel, we'll talk about how Heat 2 is precisely about the consequences of the choices made after the heist. there's just these, again, scenes that should develop one way in a lesser movie develop differently here. Like Val Kilmer's character going back home or trying to go back home to his wife. Pacino coming home to deal with a whole new crisis involving Natalie Portman's character. Macaulay getting so close to escaping, but his sense of needing to get revenge on Waingro doesn't let him do it. You know, he has to go get his revenge.
And not just any kind of revenge. It's not like a John Wick kind of revenge.
No.
It's like revenge mixed with a pride of being a professional who doesn't leave loose ends. You mentioned The Killer. That's the plot of The Killer, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a revenge story, but more than that, it's about a bruised ego.
Yes.
Trying to prove and rectify a mistake and that this will never happen again. Now, The Killer and Heat end very differently, but it's interesting to see that side of a personality. Someone who claims to be level-headed and objective, but doesn't see that a very human experience is actually what drives them to make the ultimate decisions of their respective stories.
Yeah, it's almost this sense of criminal dignity. Like, I'm not
honor among thieves.
Yes, like I'm not going to be taken seriously if I don't take care of this guy who betrayed me.
No one will hire me for a job if they don't show I can handle business.
Exactly. And so, and to quickly recap for listeners, if you're trying to follow the plot, Waingro is this guy who is taken into the crew early on.
Who, fun fact, because Mann likes to reuse actors, Wes Studi, who plays Hannah's partner in the film, so Pacino's partner, played Magua in Last of the Mohicans, and the guy who plays Waingro in LA Takedown ends up playing the new boyfriend of Hannah's estranged wife in Heat.
You're right. Yes. The two the two Waingros. Oh, and another fun fact.
Tom Noonan,
the serial killer,
Mr. Dollarhide.
Mr. Dollarhide from Manhunter, plays the tech head who gives Macaulay the bank layout and the bank schematics to plan the heist. So yeah, Michael Mann just peppering Heat with it's the ultimate Michael Mann fan movie. There's like little winks in there to all these like little.
Sadly, Danny Trejo has never showed up in another Michael Mann.
That's right. Danny Trejo is part of Macaulay's crew. A much thinner Danny Trejo, I will say. I noticed last night while watching the movie.
He ate a lot of tacos between then and now.
Well, it was before he opened Trejo's Tacos, which I've only been there once. And hey, man, Danny, love you, man. Latino representation, always appreciate it, but. Man, the Trejo's Tacos, let's just say, kept me in the men's room for a long time. But taking it back to the uniqueness of the characters in the movie, Vincent Hanna, just really stands out in this film as one of the most intriguing portrayals, not just of the decade, but I think in a lot of most of modern cinema, of the image of the detective. In most action movies and TV shows, detectives are, kind of always painted with this same collection of brushstrokes. There's the hold no bards idealist who, is just a shining beacon of decency. Then there's the
full rogue. The guy who's like barely a cop.
Yeah.
He never dresses in a suit. He's like, he has the tattoos. He smokes. Like borderline just a thug.
Yes, exactly. A great Oscar-winning archetype of that sort of cop is, of course, Denzel Washington in Training Day, who I bring up because in the same way that Heat has defined a lot of the heist movie style, Denzel's performance in Training Day proved just as influential in terms of his portrayal of the tough detective who doesn't play by the rules and turns out to be very corrupt and eventually gets killed for pissing off some Russians in Vegas, some Russian gangsters.
Or you could do the Mel Gibson thing.
Oh, yes, the crazy, manic cop in Lethal Weapon who's processing who's wacky but is also processing the death of his wife. Vincent Hanna, what's nice about him is he's written almost as a complex, it sounds funny, but as a complex one-note character. There is no difference between Hanna, the private man, and Hanna, the apex predator detective. Both are the same. You're never going to see Mann bring up one of those stereotypical domesticated scenes where, oh, we get a glimpse of Hanna going to his kid's little league baseball game, or even when he's hanging out at a party with his wife. It's not even with friends outside of his job. It's a gathering of fellow detectives. It's a cop party at a restaurant, and it's interesting because then Mann does add other layers of complexity. We get examples of how Hanna can be tender, especially with Natalie Portman's character. You can see how there could have been a good father in this guy, but his life, as you've pointed out, is complete chaos. It's a total mess.
Well, he constantly is on the verge of completely losing control.
Yeah.
With everything. I mean, you can feel that it's that kind of energy that's just about to just explode, but because he's so good at what he does, he just barely keeps things together through his one-note vision of the job.
And Pacino, as I stated earlier, gives an infectious performance. I wouldn't be shocked to, we keep quoting Roger Ebert in this show, but because he's such a good critic to quote, he once reviewed another movie Pacino and De Niro in, which was not very good. It was I forget the name, but it was another cop movie. What I remember is the opening paragraph where he says something about how by now Pacino and De Niro don't even have to do research because by now so many cops and thieves have probably modeled themselves on the people they've played. And I can easily see that with this movie. I can easily see someone attracted to that idea of Vincent Hanna, the stylish detective who doesn't quit and is out there prowling all night for his prey. And there's a great line where he tells his wife that he keeps his angst in him because he needs to stay on the edge and to stay sharp. That's where he's got to be for the kind of work he does, which really translates to, as the theme of this episode has been, obsession. It translates to the obsession of what he does. And Pacino still makes him empathetic. You still kind of want to cheer for him, even if he's threatening to go off the rails, because then there's those nice scenes where he and his partner are driving and catch Natalie Portman sitting by herself at a bus stop, and he offers to give her a ride home, and you can tell he's genuinely irritated by the fact that Natalie Portman's biological father keeps ditching her when they're supposed to do when they're supposed to hang out, and he sees that she's hurting and going down a very dark path, and he genuinely cares.
Well, what's so fascinating is that it's very clear that Hanna has a moral compass. Especially in Heat 2, you get more of an understanding why. But, again, we're just talking about the movie right now. But that extra little factor, that X factor, is that despite being very keen, very, very aware between right and wrong and how to skirt that line to, chase after his prey, you also get the sense that he isn't necessarily able to act upon his moral sensibilities.
Right.
That's what makes him so flawed.
Yeah.
That his drive sometimes gets ahead of him and pulls him ahead of where he actually wants to be or wants to go.
Yes. In that spirit, Mann has written characters that, it's kind of an interesting comparison, but Vincent Hanna is almost like the self-destructive artist, right? In other stories, who's just so tunnel visioned about what it is they want to do and about their craft that they're not aware of the out of control train they're riding. And eventually Hannah comes home and finds that his wife is seeing another man, and his reaction is angry. And again, it's almost like the tunnel vision kicks in. Not to say that what she did was right, but he's so angry and, calling her a bitch and blaming her for, or but basically chastising her for what she's done without wanting to acknowledge or realize that he caused it, that he just cannot find the proper balance between a domestic life and his obsessive career. And so he's genuinely hurt. But then again, this guy at heart is so tender that later on when Natalie Portman's character attempts to commit suicide, she chooses his hotel room to do it. And his wife even says it later, that she chose Hannah's space because
that moment at the hospital that they talk to each other about everything that's gone on, and they confront the fact that just who they are, this relationship can't work.
Yeah.
Even if it stems from some love, true love between each other, it's never going to work.
Yeah, I mean,
they have to be honest about that.
Yeah, because you can love someone, but life isn't scripted, right? There are these choices one has to make, and Hannah's not ready to, become what's the stereotype? He can't become a crossing guard or just like a normal LAPD trooper. So, he can't. He has to be that guy. He could not live with himself if he had stopped chasing Macaulay to preserve his marriage. And so it's that interesting character because there is something appealing about the danger of the man, right? The living on the edge and and one fun thing about this movie is that it's not like Michael Mann chose, some flashy young actors in their early 30s or mid 20s or something, Pacino and De Niro. I mean, they weren't, they weren't elderly by any means when they made this movie, but they were middle-aged guys. And so to see these middle-aged guys playing these roles almost gives it an extra kind of edge because you get the sense that Hannah and Macaulay, that this is it. This is the life they have chosen until the very end. And they're never going to reach that point of doing a turnaround or about face on the choices they've made in their lives.
Which leads to the ultimate confrontation, that excellent, tense, charged climax at LAX.
Yeah. Oh, such a great chase.
Shot in the backdrop of the runway.
So well done. And what I love about it is the tone of it. Again, it's not a hyped up, supercharged, gone in 60 seconds.
It's not some awesome chase. It's a lot more somber and solemn. Yeah. You mentioned a Greek tragedy earlier. You feel that they've both lost something doing this, that they can't stop it, but by both trying to follow through in what they want to do, and one comes out on top, you don't feel a sense of victory.
Yeah, no, it's actually melancholy because as you see in the coffee shop scene, these two guys in another life could have been friends. They could have been buddies. But life chose them to be adversaries, and their obsessions will not let it end any other way, right? Because you could say Hannah could, I mean, of course it would be unethical in terms of his job, but you could say Hannah could have let him go, right? Hannah could have just let Macaulay go, even though the previous shootout had resulted in a lot of deaths and all this stuff. But Hannah could have just let the guy go away and not be the wiser, and
But he can't.
But he can't.
I mean, what I said about the drive pulling him along, and you also mentioned the train, it's like they chose to start the train on its track, but they're not controlling it at all. They can't steer it. They can just add more fuel to it. So they're just on it. I mean, remember, Macaulay, he makes that decision to go after Waingro at the end. That same drive that led him to do that, it's the same drive that Pacino has to take him down. But what I do find so interesting, and the ending, it's so beautiful and stylish. I've never seen another climax do anything like that ever. But another director would have given Pacino a sense of victory. Some sense of inner peace. But the way it ends, not at all.
No, I mean, you
it's Pyrrhic.
Yeah, exactly. Pacino, you can tell, fine, caught his prey, but it's not going to fill any void in him. It's not going to put back together the things he just lost in his life. He'll probably get a commendation or some kind of acknowledgement from his superiors for having caught this guy. But so what? What life? How will life continue for him?
Well, isn't that interesting? Because the undercurrent for both of the characters, what through their craft and perfectionism and drive are they really looking for? You get a sense of what De Niro is looking for, but it's not through Edie, played by Amy Brenneman. He thinks it is, but it's not quite that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone back for Waingro. What is Pacino's character ultimately looking for? It's clearly not just the work. If it was, taking down Macaulay would have been enough, but it's not, right? That hasn't fulfilled anything for him, even though the whole movie has led us to believe that it has.
There's an interesting melancholy at the end, and I think it's Hannah simply taking down one more name in his own journey, and his own journey is as yet undefined because we don't necessarily know the demons he's chasing or running away from. Characters like this, and of course it's what makes them so enigmatic, there's always something more profound in the drives of men like this, or people like this in general, like historical figures. It's not, a lot of the big historical figures weren't just driven by, ideology or some big glorious aim. They also carry inside very personal experiences and specific scars that drove them to where they're going. And you wonder about Hannah and Macaulay.
But also very specific wisdom.
Yeah.
It's a classic, it's an interesting blend of street smarts, but also some sense of being well-versed and well-read, but not in the typical way that we saw recently in The Killer.
Yeah.
Right? Where you try and quote these intellectuals from days of yore. This, you never get that. You never get a sense, you never get a scene or a sense of them quoting anybody, but you just know that they've seen a lot, that they have the physical experience, but also a lot up there in their head that they've seen.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell Hannah has, well, there's that great moment where John Voight is running through Hannah's record for Macaulay, and, you know, John Voight plays basically Macaulay's top handler, right, who connects him with scores and potential heists. And, you know, he runs through Hannah's file for Macaulay and tells him, you know, look, this guy is, you know, he's a graduate. He went to graduate school. He's a Marine. You know, he goes, he's one of these guys who's just out there hunting all the time. He goes, look, 3 marriages. What does that tell you? That this guy likes to be home? And it's wonderful how Mann keeps the mystery, because we don't get all the answers to Hannah, even in the book, even in Heat 2. We don't necessarily get all the answers to how he becomes
exactly.
that guy.
You get some explanation, but then it leaves even more questions, which I respect.
Yeah.
You get an origin of personality, but not a true origin.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny. I mean, really the only character that you find out in the book does find some sense of fulfillment in pieces. Chris, played by Val Kilmer.
Yes.
He's the only one who ultimately finds his true north on the compass.
Yes. And Heat 2 may surprise fans that it's really all about Chris. Well, also because it's hard to tell just how much of Heat 2 was always in Mann's mind, right? He kills off certain characters at the end of Heat, which can't come back in Heat 2.
A lot, by the way. Some that you hope will make it, but like life, sometimes the apex predator is going to take those down closest to you.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping for a Waingro novel, but I remember he died too.
Eli Roth can direct.
Eli Roth can direct the Waingro. Wait, come on, Eli. We need the Waingro Apple TV spinoff. But all of this connects in what is a great film. Also, technically speaking, it's a masterclass in editing. So, for example, the pacing of the movie.
It's just immaculate.
It's just pitch perfect. Every time, the last 2 times I watched it, I'm just caught by surprise how briskly it goes by. And it's a long film. It's almost 3 hours. And yet I was surprised when I watched it again last night when the movie was already getting to the bank heist. Totally caught me off guard. I was like, oh, wait, we're here already? Wow. But it's because even though the editing is meticulous and Mann knows how to patiently tell his story, not a scene is wasted. Something is happening in every scene.
Even when you think it is, or you're confused at what's going on, he ties it back.
Yes.
Waingro, Danny Trejo, the line cook, it all comes back to the bank heist, or that great scene when De Niro calls the guy working at the bank.
Yes.
And he's like,
I'm talking to an empty telephone.
I don't understand.
Because there was a dead man on the other end of this fucking line.
The pacing, it's just perfect. The editing is meticulous in this film. And you can tell it's the kind of movie that they probably re-edited certain sections over and over until they got the pacing just right. And that also ties into the rhythm Mann creates with a soundtrack that I think truly establishes the Mann style. Before he always played around with mixing rock and pop in his soundtracks. Manhunter being a prime example of
even Klana and Last of the Mohicans.
Last of the Mohicans, yeah. I mean, he knows how to do that so well. But Heat is this really eclectic mixture of music that it's not just needle drops. It really creates the environment of the movie from
diegetically and non-diegetically. For example, what plays it throughout the film, but towards the end, Moby does a cover of Joy Division's New Dawn Fades, which is one of my favorite tracks ever. But even the piano song that Moby wrote that plays over the credits.
God moving over the face of the waters. It's so wonderful. The New Dawn Fades, which definitely creates that scene where Pacino drives to meet De Niro. One of my favorite tracks in the movie is this very elegant guitar piece, Last Night, by Terje Ripdahl and the Chasers. So when that plays, when Macaulay and Edie are talking in front of the lights of Los Angeles.
Oh, what a beautiful shot, by the way.
Real beautiful.
That shallow focus, and it just looks like a sea of stars in the background.
Well, it's interesting because I was reading in Rybin's book that Spinotti shot that in front of a green screen to make sure that they wouldn't lose the sharpness of the images of the city. So I don't know where they're actually standing, but he did that.
I would have never
screen.
been able to tell.
Yeah, it's
you
like,
see, you can use green screen, but if you do it right, then.
See, Kevin Feige, are you listening,
Kevin? Are you listening, Kevin?
Yeah, because it's a great green screen shot. So that's a great jam. Brian Eno did the music, the famous thump that plays when they're robbing the bank.
Now, please explain who Brian Eno is for people who aren't familiar with U2 and other great pop artists.
Oh, well, Brian Eno is a really great artist to check out. He was a big name in the 70s and 80s with bands like Roxy Music. Before switching over to producing, and he produced a lot of important work by artists like David Bowie. In the 90s, he became really prominent as a part of the producing team of U2. He's the guy that gave the band this kind of ambient, atmospheric charge to their music and albums like Achtung Baby. And for a while, he did the same thing with Coldplay. He produced Viva La Vida, or Death and All His Friends, which is why it has that distinctive spacey, milky sound in some of
what else he's saying is it's the reason why the album is great.
Yes, exactly. It's one of those producer artists who, just really knows how to create a rich soundscape, and it really works here. He's the perfect collaborator with Mann. Although the actual score for the film, which is by Elliot Goldenthal, is also, fantastic. There's that great rushing string piece that plays when Waingro escapes.
Yes.
From the gang, so it's a nice mixture, which Mann would then try to repeat later on in The Insider and Public Enemies.
The Elliot Goldenthal score is just so beautiful. It's a very different monster to what he does in Heat. But again, it shows that versatility. And instead of just doing the same Hans Zimmer score for everything you do, if you have the right vision of a soundscape for your visual landscape and the inspiration and the tools to do the job, you can create something beautiful. And it's so, the Heat score, I've always found it so interesting because it's one that you kind of forget about after watching the movie. You know, you forget to look it up on Spotify. But then when you watch the movie, you realize how important it is. It's that sleight of hand, which I think is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, because it never overtakes the material, and it's kind of scattered. This is not, to, again, reference Hans, it's not like his Christopher Nolan scores where every second of the movie
it's not
has,
Dune.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where every second
or
of the movie has
Oppenheimer,
something.
which wasn't Hans, it was Ludwig Göransson, but
trying to be Hans.
But there tends to be
that's a great score.
There tends to be a running theme with Nolan movies that he has music playing almost all the time.
Yes.
And the mixing is whack, just whack.
No, yeah, it's very true. Mann doesn't have that here at all. The music really decorates the film. It really underlines the emotions or the mood that he's going for.
Well, it captures the unsaid emotions that Hannah and Macaulay will never be able to emit.
Exactly. Or it gives the other scenes the necessary melancholy and depth that they require. Like the ending, right? The use of Moby's
God moving over the face of the waters.
It's a great way to close the film because the hip thing, right? The cool thing would have been to end it with some...
Well, New Dawn Fades.
Yeah, exactly. Or a more generic choice, some kind of, very pumped up rock song that would be totally on the nose, right?
But it works so perfectly because you get the sense, like with most Mann films, I think one thing I've enjoyed the most is you know that there's a history before and after opening and closing credits. But the Moby song really does project this idea that the city of Los Angeles will continue to function, that in fact the events of this movie is just a little slice of the pie of the hundreds of thousands of things going on. Most people might not even know that this big event is going on except for a passing news story.
Oh, well, yeah. No, exactly. And in his book, Rybin talks about this idea that Mann's films, in particular Heat, in Heat we are seeing characters inhabiting a much larger world than themselves. And
Los Angeles is a character.
Yes, and they're trying to define their destinies and acquire their wants, but this world around them is so much bigger that it constantly interferes. They can't escape the bigger world they live in. And, to be honest, that's all of us. That's all of us who inhabit, whether it's a big city, whether it's a small city, whether it's a small town.
Try that in a small town.
Exactly. We cannot escape the impact of the wider world we live in.
Of the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, it is ultimately a film about products of your environment.
Yes. They are the kinds of cops and criminals they are because of the kind of city they inhabit. Los Angeles is that mix of style, but also grit. We are much
danger.
We're much uglier than New York in terms of our aesthetic. I'm sorry I say that as a Los Angeles resident, but there's still a sense of glamour to the city that attracts people all the time to move here. But then they're shocked when a lot of outsiders I meet move here, and then they're shocked by the sheer underbelly that we have.
Walk
the sheer
outside
grit,
of the Chinese theater, and it might be one of the worst areas of Los Angeles.
Yes, no joke. For those of you listening who are not from LA, Hollywood, right, the most famous name associated with the city, Hollywood for a Los Angelino, is not always the corner of town you necessarily want to be in.
It's not Hail Caesar, the Coen brothers' excellent movie that people forget about. It's very different. That is all in Burbank.
Yes. Hollywood itself, some night on a bad day, looks like Mad Max. And don't get me started on downtown Los Angeles, especially Skid Row, and other corners of the city that are increasingly. I was in K-Town today, meeting with somebody, and while walking to the train, I was utterly shocked at. I rarely walk through K-Town in detail, and there was a corner of K-Town on Wilshire Boulevard that looked like the world after a nuclear war. I walked by this church where there was just the world's biggest pile of clothing and garbage outside of the church. And this is in Koreatown, which has nice areas. But what we're saying is that's LA. For every nice area, there's also one that looks very apocalyptic.
Well, its tapestry is woven with nothing but contradictions from all over the world.
Yes, and he
made up of all sorts of different qualities of textures. Every big city is like that, but there's something very unique about it in Los Angeles that, as people who have lived here most of our lives, you're very qualified to critique it and get it.
Yes.
What man who knows how long he was in pre-production for the movie for, but he gets it. The areas that you see does give you a good sense of Los Angeles. All the factors that make it what it is. Its core DNA.
Yeah.
And the people who move through them would realistically go to the locales you see and were made famous in the movie.
And you know what? That actually just made me think of how this is that rare LA movie where nobody in the movie is associated with the entertainment industry. Right? Like none of these characters, none of them aspire to be actors or supermodels or whatever. This really is the sector of LA that's just carrying on like in any other big city, which is what makes the characters so microcosmic and fascinating. You never see Hannah hanging out with, some Hollywood type. And even though the thieves have all this money, they don't either. You never see them hanging out. In a cliche movie like this, in a cliche movie emulating this kind of plot, you'd have, Robert De Niro, when he meets Edie, it's actually that she's an actress or something, that she's an aspiring screenwriter or something like that. No, you don't get that at all in this movie. Or in Collateral. In Collateral, you don't get any of that either. The most glamorous it gets in Collateral is that they go hang out at a jazz club, and meet the owner who once played with Miles Davis on stage. So, yeah, there's that genuine authenticity to the portrayal of the city.
And on that note, we will transition to our next big topic of Heat, which is the novel.
And what better way to segue into the book than to quote a renowned author? Kafka, I think, really taps into Mann's mentality when he says, don't bend, don't water it down. Don't try to make it logical. Don't edit your own soul according to fashion. Rather, follow your most intense obsessions mercilessly. And who knows, that could be a favorite quote of Mr. Mann's, because nearly 3 decades after releasing Heat, he came back to the world of the movie and its characters in an unsuspecting way. In this world of endless franchise reboots and prequels and sequels and TV spin-offs, Mann decides to aim for a literary return to form with Heat 2, which he co-wrote with the author Meg Gardner. In hindsight, it kind of makes sense, because before Mann studied film in England, he actually majored in literature when he went to college in the United States. So there was always a literary vein in this filmmaker. He just focused most of his writing energies on screenplays, obviously. Heat 2 as a book, though, it really is a very good read. And I don't say that just because we're both fans of Michael Mann here and we're obviously diving deep into his work. No, it really is really good. I would start off by saying that it's a interesting combo of serious, let's say, literary crime writing, and this is, and I don't say this in a disparaging way, like your average, quick consumption paperback that you can grab at the supermarket or the airport.
No, good point. Because I think when we finished it, we both said, wow, this is really quite a good read, but it doesn't transcend the material. Like, if we're talking about the ceiling, like this is the top of the ceiling for the idea of a page-turning paperback that you would find at an airport or a Rite Aid. And really, we're not saying that in a disparaging manner. The book reads and flows very well. In fact, what struck me the most is, in a way, it does read like a screenplay that's just been fleshed out a little bit more into a book.
Oh, yeah. Which has happened before in the history of movies. A really quick example to give that's very famous is The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride began as a movie idea, and then it was turned into a novel first, and then it whiplashed back into becoming a screenplay. So William Goldman, and he writes about this in his own books on screenwriting, and it's a good reference point here in that there are some ideas that kind of just work better fleshed out first as novels. Darren Aronofsky does the same thing with his bigger projects. Noah and The Fountain were comic books. He turned them into graphic novels before he was able to turn them into movies. I suspect that was Mann's aim here. First, play around with a Heat sequel as a book, see how it works, and as we all know now, if you keep up with movie news, he's announced it as his next project after Ferrari.
And it'll be fun to get into speculation towards the end of this segment, because there are so many questions on structure, casting, cinematography. Dante, please stop making crap. We need you. But
Dante
I think
Spinotti, what are you up to these days?
What's very striking about the book, first and foremost, it feels like Mann has reunited with old friends. This book is a prequel and a sequel. So the book starts by picking up with Chris, who many people may or may not know is played by the great Val Kilmer. And the sequel elements pretty much follow his perspective.
Yes, and which, of course, makes sense because I'm assuming most of the people listening have already seen Heat. He's the main character from the heist group who's left alive at the end of the movie. So if you're doing a sequel, you can't go back to Macaulay and you can't go back to the other guys because, well, they're dead. They met a bullet-riddled end in Heat. So it makes sense that Chris is our main guy to follow, and he proves it to actually be very charismatic and entertaining.
Well, how Mann does it is very interesting. like I just mentioned, it feels like Mann is reuniting with old friends, but it's also very clear that he has woven in a lot of the subject matter that we see in his later filmography, which will be one of our last episodes. We need to decide how we will structure that, but Collateral, Miami Vice, Public Enemies, Black Hat. So that's all in the book, but with characters from Heat, with Chris. So we go down to Mexico, we go down to Paraguay and Brazil, but with these characters. And it's kind of like a very nice soup of all these different ingredients.
It also has Mann's obsession with the practical details of, I guess you could say, the mechanical or engineering functions of crimes. So he doesn't get overloaded on the jargon like, Tom Clancy or those kinds of authors. But he gives you like these fun insights into the vehicles, the weapons, the practicalities of the stuff the characters do. And as we mentioned, it's a prequel-sequel, so it basically jumps back and forth between what's going on with Chris in the present, as he's essentially starting a new life in an infamous corner of South America in Paraguay, because he can't stay in the United States after the big heist at the end of Heat.
That area of Paraguay, specifically, we see in Miami Vice.
Yes.
So I know that's been on his mind for a long time because it is a fascinating area.
It's stuff Mann is obviously obsessed with, as we've been saying, right?
Absolutely. But the prequel, it's also very nice because Mann is also returning to Chicago. Yes. Thief, his excellent James Caan film, takes place in the underbelly of Chicago. And most of the prequel takes place there.
And there's little stylistic references to Thief, to even Manhunter, because and of course we won't spoil too much, but the storyline in the past has to do with Hannah essentially tracking down a violent attacker.
Well, let's be a little bit more clear. This guy commits home invasions. We'll give you a little bit we'll whet your appetite. So this guy basically has a power complex, and he commits home invasions and sexually assaults and murders people in wealthy families who live in really expensive brownstone homes. You can see them all over New York. You can see them all over Chicago. So that's more of the Hannah angle. But what's interesting about the novel is how the main antagonist of the novel is interwoven with the goings-on with Macaulay and his gang.
Yeah.
Because you follow their early career. And what I specifically like is it's still not an origin story for these guys. You learn more about them, but you don't need to know specifically how they became criminals.
Too much time isn't wasted on the quote-unquote literal origin stories of these guys. We get, as with Heat, the movie, you get from the little details how they came to be who they are, which makes them feel more real because that's how we tend to interact with people in real life anyway. We get clues to how someone is.
Yes.
Unless someone pours their heart out to you, you tend to really get a sense of someone through clues as we get to know them.
And through action.
Yes.
Which it's show, don't tell, which is kind of funny to say because that's essentially what a novel is. It's telling you.
Yeah.
But Mann, and again, I'm going to return to his audio commentary on the films which provide them. He brings up a lot of references, books he read, specific places he's visited, contacts, which is the mark of a good historian or journalist. that you have the specificity. That's what sells fiction so well. So yeah, there's a heist that they set up in the prequel elements, an early heist of theirs, and yeah, the kinds of drills they're using and how much time it takes and the security systems. He goes into just enough detail that it's like, okay, like this is as legit as we can get, but it doesn't impede the narrative that is unfolding in front of us.
In fact, if you for those who dive into the novel, one section that does take more time to, let's say, give us the background of a specific relationship, it still makes sense because it explains the character's motivations. So there's a fantastic flashback moment when where the novel narrates how Chris met his wife, Charlene, played by Ashley Judd in the movie. And it's a great moment. It has a lot to do with Las Vegas and the Vegas underworld and gambling, and
But it also feels very much like Chris. It's like reading this, you're like, yep, that 100% makes sense.
Yes.
And it's really nice to see that the kind of attitude and dialogue from right now, the only Heat movie is transplanted perfectly here. You hear them speak and you're like, oh yeah, that's Val Kilmer. That's totally him. That's totally Ashley Judd.
Oh yeah, and same with Hannah, same with Macaulay. Mann basically has lived with these characters for so long that it's easy for him to jump back into them and channel their voices. Even as he plays around with the freedom a novel gives you to make the action scenes grandiose, right? And you don't have to worry about budget. So when you're writing a novel, you can have big shootouts, and the climax of the novel involves a big shootout on a highway. And it's all.
And even before that, there's a shootout in like the canyons of Mexico and the bordering desert areas. It's quite a spectacle.
But it's great because and you know what's great about that?
Brutal.
And brutal.
It's also a film. Sorry, not a film. You see, that's how visceral it is. I'm already thinking of it
as a movie. Yeah.
But it's also about people learning their lessons.
Yes.
And not creating an environment where loose ends, whether good intention or bad intentioned, will lead to the destruction of a score or the destruction of loved ones.
Yeah, it's a very it plays with the same moral questions and conundrums of Heat. And what's nice is not by repeating Heat. So what makes this
that's like the most important aspect.
Yeah. It's not recycling. A lot of sequels, prequels make the mistake of thinking, basically, since we're returning to a recognized title, we should just copy its beats. J.J. Abrams with Star Wars, but Mann,
but not Rian Johnson with Episode 8, and then J.J. Abrams again with Episode 9. Jesus,
Mann is too good of a storyteller not to fall into that trap. So when you're reading the book, you really feel like you're catching up with the evolution of these characters that, if you're a cinephile, that you've known for almost 30 years, right? It's kind of like when you it really feels like when you catch up with someone you haven't seen in 10 or 20 years, and you realize they've been through a lot, how life ebbs and flows and goes through many shifts. And that totally feels right with Chris. It's not just repeating the same beats from Heat. We see that Chris has had to change countries, change locales. He has to now connect with a whole new criminal outfit. Yeah, there's a typical man, let's say, love interest in Paraguay.
Let's just say that he ripped off directly from Miami Vice and directly from Black Cat. I rolled my eyes. I was like, come on, dude. I think we know what your real obsession is.
And if you watch the movies just mentioned and then read the book, you'll know perfectly what we mean.
Yeah.
The moment he described her in the novel, And of course, okay, mini spoiler. Of course, she's the daughter of another baller. Let's say. I was like, okay, Michael,
okay,
all
man,
right.
okay.
But it's still fun. It's still
it is.
worried.
Well, one aspect that we need to talk about is Hannah.
Yes.
I got the sense when reading the novel and flipping through it again that Hannah in the novel, especially in the present day, even though the present day in the novel takes place in 2000, 2001, feels very much like the Michael Mann stand-in.
Yes.
Because what you find out in Hannah's story is he's catching, or he finds out that the main antagonist for this story, who commits crimes in Chicago in the prequel, where Hannah spent his years as a younger detective, is back. He has resurfaced.
Yeah.
So Hannah is catching his loose end, a guy that he forgot about for years, but now has a chance to reel him in.
Yes, it's almost like, as with Mann's obsessions, it's a metaphor of how what obsesses Hannah stays with him, it haunts him. And because of his line of work, there's this nightmarish reality that sometimes some of these monsters you thought were out of your life come back. And it reminds one of those famous true cases of certain police officers or detectives who are just haunted by the same case for 20, 30, 40 years. There's a bit of Zodiac almost in that
Yes.
part of the plot. You know, that idea of just being obsessed with this killer, this attacker for so long. It's
Who's
almost
like the greasiest slime ball, like a complete departure from our multiple protagonists, whether it's Hannah or Macaulay and Chris. He's like, his motivation is nothing more than the violation of the body.
Yeah.
Macaulay and these guys, they're just about, well, taking scores. So, again, it's nice to see a new element introduced that isn't just a repeat.
Yeah, because
it's not like we're getting Macaulay 1.5 or Chris 1.5 as the guy to take down from Hannah's perspective. It's someone different, and it's a lot more raw because how it ties into Hannah's story. Hannah has this stepdaughter who in the movie is played by Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
As we find out, he has a strained relationship with her. She has problems. He is even more messed up now after the events of 95. So Hannah, this one is actually more emotionally charged. There's more of a personal angle to why he wants to take basically his whale down.
Yes, and it's very different from Heat, the movie, because unlike Heat, it's an adversary Hannah cannot relate to at all. He's not feeling the same conflict of essentially having to take down a man that in another reality, in a parallel universe, they could have been friends. Here, this villain really personifies Hannah's demons.
He's a thug. He's a brute. He's what happens when your, let's say, desires aren't reined in or checked in any capacity. So it's like Hannah is looking at what he could become, and it repulses him.
Yes, when it explains in a nice way his drive, right? Because in Heat, the movie, it's brilliantly written, but you still are always left with good questions about the characters. You always wonder, what drives this man to be a wolf every night, right? To just live possessed by the hunt, by the need to catch criminals. And the book, I think, crystallizes it well.
Well, you just mentioned possessed, and the way Mann and Gardner write Hannah, you definitely get the sense he is just like possessed. Yeah. He's still driven by purpose, but it's a bit circular now. he doesn't have like a forward drive. He's just taking bad guys down because that's all he can do, and it's just like this big haze.
It fills the void, basically.
It fills or tries to, and that's part of the problem. But it's really interesting. I think it's like 500 pages, but it really
it flies by though.
It really does fly by.
It's again, that's why I compare it to a good airport paperback, because usually when you say 500, 600 pages, yes. I mean, if you're reading the new study of, economics and modern day, Brazil or something, hey, if that's your thing, all power to you. But
especially after 600 pages.
But it takes a bit of effort, right? Whereas these novels, when they're well done, it's like a good 2.5 hour action movie. If it's well done, well paced, well executed, like Heat the movie, right? The time flies by, and it's the same. It's the same with this book. We read it when it was first published, and it was not a hard read at all. It was actually very enjoyable. It made my commutes breeze by. So yeah.
When you also mentioned the dialogue, well, we both have, and you really, it's nice to read. I think someone made this observation. I don't remember the source, that Michael Mann writes these characters in a way that can be called gutter poetry.
Yes.
That they're not like waxing philosophical, but the way they speak and the way they think is poetic.
He's like Raymond Chandler or James Ellroy, the author of L.A. Confidential and American Tabloid, and The Black Dahlia. This book is in that vein, in the sense that you are enthralled, but you know what? Another interesting comparison, I think, is Thomas Harris, who wrote Silence of the Lambs and, Red Dragon, which Mann adapted. It's books that are very entertaining and very engrossing, but they're also written with a special kind of eloquence. They're a nice combo of literature and pop art. It's like we're both intermingle. Funny enough, kind of like what Mann does with his films when they really work. You can be entertained by Heat as just a really good crime movie, but there's still layers to it, and the photography is elegant, and there's thought put into the language. No one's like waxing Shakespeare in these stories, but that's the point, that you don't have to necessarily sound like an Oxford lecture to be eloquent or sophisticated, because every life is its own story and environment. And that's what's nice about this novel. Even when Chris is, hanging out with these roughnecks in Paraguay and, dodging assassins' bullets, he's still haunted by his wife, and he's thinking about their son, and what he's really doing in Paraguay is trying to figure out what road his life is going to take, even though it's a very perilous one.
Well, there's a great reconciliation between him and Charlene, who they both love each other.
Yeah.
But there comes a point over the phone where they agree that they need to, there's no feasible way for them to physically reconnect anymore.
Yeah.
And that sets Chris free, because everything he's doing is to hopefully come back to her. But as life turns out, not everything can go the way that you hope.
Which is one of the reasons why crime stories in general are so gripping. And I think that's why we sometimes misinterpret our fascination with it into the whole true crime thing. I think, we criticize, obviously, the true crime obsession a lot on this podcast. But I think subconsciously what attracts people to these stories is that there's nothing like crime to really capture human follies, desires, and just the difference between poor decisions and wise choices, because so much crime really happens almost by impulse or rash rash behavior. And even though Heat 2 has a very layered plot and all these different storylines, a lot of the stuff that happens in the story, like in Heat the movie, that completely affects people, it's all based on that moment where you could have made another choice, but you went for this one. Like the scene we talked about in the movie where Robert De Niro approaches his former driver at the restaurant, says, "Hey, right now, yes or no?" And the guy could have chosen to not go along with the heist, but he goes for it anyway because his job sucks. And in that moment, he might not be thinking rationally, and he ends up dead. He ends up shot down during the heist. And the novel has a lot of those little moments like that too, where people could step away, but instead they go for it. Or when they should go for it, they step away.
With Macaulay, I mean, how all the stories converge is through Macaulay's, let's just say, personal entanglements.
Yes.
And also kind of a sicko who, like, is trying to chase the next fix, our main antagonist. He's smart, but, like, in the way that he's hunger for wealth and a big score, whether it's cash, jewels, or people.
Yeah.
Drives him to keep chasing.
And because he's probably damaged. Well, not probably. He is damaged.
100%
damaged.
I mean, he could end up on Mindhunter if that show wasn't unfortunately canceled by Netflix.
Come on, guys, bring it back. Not to swerve away too much from Heat, but yeah, that's actually another good example of a great drama series, which I suspect heavily influenced by Michael Mann. In terms of its style and tone. But it's true. The characters in the book have that richness of human complexity in the movie, except without recycling the beat points again. Expanded.
And they're not stupid.
They're not dumb. Yes, that's very
People
important.
outmaneuver. The wild card gets thrown in because people are smart.
Well, it's something that crime reporters always mention when they do in-depth pieces on these cartels, how it is a world where, as much as these guys get slammed as brutes and killers, and of course a lot of them are, but there's also this need for, because of the nature of what it is, and you can't do it out in the open. It is almost a really dangerous game of smartest person wins, because any mistake, any slip up gets you killed or arrested. So
on a larger scale, it is counterintelligence. I mean, these narcos have equipment that modern militaries use.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's actually part of Chris's story. Chris, you actually get to see how these big players are doing counterintelligence and counter-surveillance. That's what adds this new layer and raises the stakes for the operations, and it goes to show how the world does indeed function. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it does what good shows like Narcos Mexico does, which is it shows you so well the parallel between legal capitalism and illegal capitalism, how they're both just mirror images.
Well, Ozark too.
Ozark is a perfect example. And again, another show I would venture to say heavily influenced by Michael Mann, even in its look. It's very
that blue baby.
Oh yeah, so even in its style, it's very mannish. But yeah, the Paraguay scenes do that so well in the book. It's like if you take away the guns, if you take away the threats of bodily harm, Chris is operating in any other Fortune 500 company, and the cutthroat attitude is just being diverted towards criminal activity as opposed to supposedly legal business dealings. Now, Mann has announced this as his next film after Ferrari, which premieres this December. And
Christmas Day.
And it really makes you wonder how he will return to this world. I would say it feels like he might do a combination of both. He might sustain the tone of of Heat, right? The original Heat. At the same time, if going by the book is what he's going to do, he might also not want to repeat himself, right? It sounds like he's going to try something new while not losing the spirit of Heat 1.
Yeah, so this is where we get into speculation on what the hell is he going to do.
Yeah, because nothing's been shot.
Nothing's been shot.
We don't even know if the screenplay is done.
This book, again, I was going to call it a movie because it feels like a movie. It jumps back and forth between the past and the present. And remember, Val Kilmer, he had throat cancer, so he can't
come back.
He can't perform anymore. So how are they going to do that? How are they going to cast younger versions? Because I think it's very clear we are going to see a lot of the younger crew. Please do not do digital de-aging. It always looks bad. I'm sorry. It always looks bad.
Well, Adam Driver, I think, is rumored to be Macaulay.
I wouldn't be surprised. After Ferrari, which we haven't seen, but hopefully end of this week we will.
I think he's being rumored as the young Macaulay. No idea yet who's going to be the young Hannah. Chris is tricky because...
I bet you they're going to do Austin Butler.
Yeah, you know what? That would actually make total sense.
Just please not Timothée Chalamet. I'm sorry, that guy can't act.
Well, here's the thing. Even if Val Kilmer, let's say, didn't have his cancer situation or the effects of his cancer diagnosis, it would still be hard because Heat 2, one little thing also to mention to we're in such a visual mode here, to listeners, is that Heat 2, both storylines are technically period pieces because the novel only goes up to the year 2000. And I'm sorry, millennials, yes, that's 23 going 24 years ago. So it still wouldn't have worked to have Val Kilmer bring back, unless they did the Irishman thing.
Which just doesn't look good. Now, the other thing he can do is he can just shift the timeline.
That too.
That the modern story does take place in 2023 or 2024, and that I suppose the sections in 95 would need to take place then because, I mean, Chris's story just picks up as he tries to flee into Mexico.
I mean, yeah.
There's a lot for him to think about, and picking up on the energy of the characters, right? Yes, cast new actors, but you still need to get the same, not even mannerisms, but the same just energy going.
He basically has to do on a bigger scale in terms of casting or the amount of characters. He basically has to do on a bigger scale what Coppola did with Godfather 2, right? Where Robert De Niro was the perfect choice to make you believe he was a young Vito Corleone. So you believe it. So the challenge for Heat 2 is, how do we get cast that really feel like a younger Al Pacino, a younger Val Kilmer? How do we get these guys to really make us believe that they are these other characters, not only these other characters, but again, if you're a cinephile, if you're a big film buff, characters you've been familiar with for almost 30 years now. Because when Heat 2 as a film were to premiere, I don't know what Mann's timetable is, but it would be released when the movie is either about to be 30 or is hitting 30. So that's 3 decades of people knowing these characters. I don't know. I mean, if Adam Driver is the young Macaulay, that wouldn't be the worst
However,
choice.
He can't just be Adam Driver.
Exactly.
Adam Driver is one of those actors. Now, we haven't seen Ferrari.
Yeah.
We haven't seen it. But you always feel like, oh, yeah, they cast Adam Driver to play an Adam Driver type of character. He can't do that. playing Neil like he can't.
Oh,
he
yeah,
really
no.
has to become someone different.
Yes.
So there's I don't know. There's a lot of work that goes into it,
And that's also-
even the structure. I mean,
yeah.
how much does he want to cover? What is he going to cut out? How much is he going to balance between past and present?
I almost wouldn't be shocked if we hear. I don't know. It depends. I would love to see it as a movie, but and again, we're being speculative, and
It seems more like a miniseries.
yes,
to me.
I wouldn't be shocked if Mann then announces that it's been turned into a series, which wouldn't be the worst thing. It's been done before. There have been series that have just continued on from a movie. Heck, there are movies being re-chopped up into series. This week we just saw Baz Luhrmann release Australia as a 6-piece series, Faraway Downs. I wouldn't be shocked if that'll be the fate of Heat 2. I just, it would not surprise me in the least. But again, a year from now, we may sound
We'll
just
get
like
trickle down information.
Yeah.
What I do know is, I know exactly what stuff Mann will want to put in the film for sure.
Yes.
The home invasion is going to be in the movie. The first heist in the prequel era will be in the film. The ending gun battle on the 405 where everything is in flames probably going to be in there, and the gunfight in the canyon in Arizona, Mexico probably going to be in there.
And
it's Mann.
And the hot Asian criminal. Of course she's going to be. Of course she's going to. The power broker, the hot Asian power broker is going to be in In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if he brings back what's her name from Miami Vice?
Oh my God.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But talking about bringing back Dante Spinotti.
Oh, yes.
Is he coming back for this?
Oh, come on, Michael. He has to. There's no way that you can bring back. Okay, Spinotti, his as we mentioned in our Manhunter episode, Spinotti's style is so distinctive. They brought him back for the remake, for the readaptation of Red Dragon in 2002. That's how distinctive his style is. So if they can bring him back for another variation of the story he told with Mann in Manhunter, surely you can bring him back for Heat 2 so Dante can stop shooting these bizarre straight to VOD movies like Fatale and
Black and Blue.
You can bring him back for Heat 2. Come on. That'll unify, that'll connect it so well to Heat 1. Heck, bring Elliot Goldenthal back for the score. Bring him back, and Moby can re-record a
new Joy Division song.
A new Joy Division song. So come on,
or who knows? Remember, Mann always has his finger on the pulse of current music. So who knows what he'll throw in there? Who knows what he'll throw in Ferrari?
No, of course. These are period films. So it'll be
That's
interesting.
true.
It'll be interesting to see how.
I think he's going to avoid the modern day like the plague after what happened with Black Cat.
Yes. Well, yeah, because remember he did try it with Ali, which was also a period film. That the really funny training sequence where Will Smith runs endlessly on screen. He tried it there, didn't quite work, which is why Heat 2, if he keeps it between the years 1988 and 2000, which is the years the novel spans, he might actually choose some cool vintage. I don't want to say, I'm sorry, millennials, but yeah, I won't say
vintage. Tangerine Dream for the 88 stuff.
Yes, some classic needle drops. The nice little wink there at Thief. So Heat 2, yeah, go check it out. The book is now available in paperback and hardcover. And when the movie comes out, we're assuming it's a go because it's been officially announced. Then it'll be fun to revisit it here and look back at our predictions and our speculations.
And
see
it will
what
be
we got
Mann's first ever sequel to any project he's ever made.
That's very true. It would be his first sequel. which is something kind of affecting these directors of the more established classic variety, if you want to call them that. Ridley Scott's shooting Gladiator 2 right now, so I don't know. There's something about these guys.
The difference is this is not a legacy sequel. A lot of these guys are making legacy sequels.
Yes.
This is a unique position where it's the same cast of characters, but at a different point in their life, just like how Mann is at a different point in his life.
Yeah, so it's something special about Mann in that even in his flops, there's the personal, right? There's the personal touch of Michael Mann in there. And of course, it's so distinctive. That's why he's proven to be highly influential. And now that the book is out and the movie's coming up, it'll be interesting to see the circle complete itself with Heat, because since premiering in 1995, the movie has proven to be one of those crime pictures that other directors are clearly chasing after when they're doing their own variation on this story. Specific examples that you can name right off the bat from the last few decades are movies like Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. That's probably the most prominent recent example of a movie directly influenced by Heat. And it's not
prominent and successful.
Yes, and it's not speculation. Nolan has clearly, openly said that Heat was a big model of his for Dark Knight. In the tone of the film, the editing, the photography.
The bank heists, for goodness sake.
The opening bank heist. The way it's edited and the way the Hans Zimmer score. The music in that heist scene was Zimmer and Newton Howard, right?
Yes.
So
a lot of people forget. Everyone only gives Hans the credit for the Nolan Batman films. The reason that the scores are so great is he co-wrote all of them.
Yes.
I don't think if he wrote them solo, they would be as memorable.
Exactly. Collaboration, people.
Hot take there, but...
Hey, you know what? With movies, that's the thing. Collaboration. That's a big thing, and we forget that under these big names. But the opening heist scene in Dark Knight clearly modeled on Heat, and you can even hear it in the music. The music almost sounds also like a little nod at Elliot Goldenthal's music from Heat the movie.
We'll even look at the color grading. The most famous example, the shot of Batman standing on top of the tower in Hong Kong.
Oh, yeah.
And also after the warehouse exploded and Rachel died, it's the same kind of blue used in the famous shot of Macaulay, played by De Niro, and Heat standing by the window. Like the same blue, the same kind of pan up. But even in the rest of the film, those kinds of steel blue tints, it's all in there.
It's all Michael Mannish. And of course, the most famous aspect of the most famous example from the movie is the famous conversation between Batman and the Joker in the interrogation room, where
a little more physical, but no, absolutely the concept of
idea.
The face-off.
And that they mirror each other, right? That they're both two sides of the same coin, right? One is for law and order, and the other one is for defiance of law and order. One adheres to a social code of conduct, and the other one doesn't. And it's the same in Heat, right? This idea that the cop and the heist and the bank robber are both living by their own codes. And they're both two sides of the same coin, and if not thematically, other directors keep aping Mann visually. So there's, it's endless.
Ben
Affleck in The Town, the way the violence and the heists are shot in that film.
all about flawed men, although a little bit more rugged. I mean, again, the atmosphere, that kind of cool tints and the sense of realism.
And that idea of giving more depth to the characters. That
they're bad men, but there's something still charming about them.
Yes. And this idea that they're essentially outlaws who are driven by a little more than just the wealth or
That's
the promise
just like
of
Sons of
easy-
Anarchy.
I've seen Sons of Anarchy here and there.
Even if it's not directly inspired, the idea of fleshing out people that you would just write off as, oh, they're criminals or gangsters, they're just bad guys.
Yeah, no, there's more to them.
It's been done in the history of cinema. Mann didn't pioneer it. Our point is that the way he did it kind of exploded that concept.
And of course, the aesthetic. I mean, it's the aesthetic is so alluring, and movies like Drive, Nicholas Winding Refn. That one's been compared more often to Thief, but it has a lot of the Heat vibe to it as well. Widows by Steve McQueen, which is pretty much it's interesting because that's that director's sole attempt at trying to prove he could do a popcorn crime thriller. And because Steve McQueen is a director of many depths and a breadth of let's say interests. But yeah, Widows, which is a remake of a TV thriller. And I note that because the TV show looks nothing like the movie. You can tell that McQueen took the concept of this heist narrative from the TV show, and when he decided to turn it into a movie, he was obviously looking at Mann's sense of tone and aesthetic for the film.
The idea of the heist and the gunfights being raw, not simple, but not adding a lot in post-production, not sweeping score or extra sound effects.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
That keeping it natural. Obviously, you can still hype it up with editing, and you add little bits here and there, but keeping it in the moment, grounded, raw as much as possible.
Same with a much lesser example, which is Den of Thieves, a movie from 2018 that I thoroughly disliked. But the visual style, clearly copying Mann. These slow-mo shots. Well, not slow-mo, but these pensive shots of an armored truck driving through the city with a neon glow and that cold tint. The way the characters try to wax gutter poetry, but it doesn't quite sell in Den of Thieves.
What, it comes off as just ridiculous?
Oh, yeah. Gerard Butler in that one is, although I don't know. I like Gerard, but you kind of feel like he's just showing up on set dressed as he probably always dresses during the day and just sits there with his big tattoos, and he's him and 50 Cent are the tough conflicted criminals, And then there's Wrath of Man by Guy Ritchie, which I think is one of the better recent examples.
Wrath of Man is very good.
That's fantastic thriller, really good. Jason Statham, knowing how to use his persona, but to a different kind of effect. He's still that quiet, brooding guy, but for a very edgy, dark story where the motivations of the character make sense. And you can tell that's, Guy Ritchie tired of doing his usual, Brooks Brothers.
I think it was a subtle shot at his quote-unquote work with Aladdin.
Yeah. I still am willing to bet he didn't actually direct much
of course
that
not.
movie.
No. Most of the shots were done in a computer before he even showed up on set.
On the set to direct the quote-unquote script. But
well, there's also that just reminded me, 999. I don't know if anyone remembers that movie.
Oh my God!
It got panned by critics, but when I saw it 7 years ago, I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. And then I found out it was directed by John Hillcoat. Our man, John Hillcoat.
One of the great Australian directors. He made one of the best modern westerns, The Proposition. And yeah, 999 was kind of like with Dark Knight. I don't want to fully compare the two, but 999 feels like he had his Michael Mann moment where he said, you know what, I'm going to do like a Michael Mann style crime film where the visuals are rich. It's about atmosphere.
Also products of the environment. Of all the movies we've mentioned, I mean, The Town a bit, but 999 about crooked cops really feels like you step into a very much lived-in, dirty world.
Yes. So these are clear examples of Mann's the lingering influence of heat on.
And there's many more, but if we listed all of them, we would probably be here
till 10 p.m. Oh, this episode would be 7 hours long.
And we would have long gray beards and stuff. So we just wanted to pick some of the more
prominent,
notable ones. I mean, in fact, it's funny enough. To this day, people still talk about wanting to make their heat. Coming up in the next year or 2 years, Pedro Pascal and Chris Hemsworth, our man Thor, who was in one of the worst movies of last year, Thor: Love and Thunder. Yay!
I did like Bao, though, the dumpling god.
They're going to star in a crime drama that the stars and the director have openly said they want to make their version of Heat. It's called Crime 101, and it's from the director of American Animals, which is an excellent movie. Not enough people talk about it. I'm not going to give anything away because it's a very unique kind of crime thriller, but
and kind of Michael Mannish in its own way.
It's true,
too.
Very true. So even to this day, people are like, we want to do our version. We want to cement our legacy in this genre.
And of course, and speaking about genres, the influence of Heat crosses genres, and you're you're more well versed in this aspect of the film's influence than myself. But Heat has proven to be a big influence on video games.
100%. I'm just going to list a few because you can get bits and pieces from almost any video game. But if anyone's played Grand Theft Auto 5, one of the early heists is literally a recreation of the armored truck heist from the beginning of Heat. The same shots, similar getup. I mean, it's kind of incredible. Video games like Kane and Lynch, where it's a little bit more brutal, but we're talking about bad men who are just trying to make their way in the world. They're kind of at the top of their game, but they're still bigger fish who are trying to interfere with their game, essentially. All the GTA games have had some sort of nod at Heat, from Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto 4, a specifically mission called 3-Leaf Clover, which takes direct inspiration from the huge bank robbery. In GTA 5, the specific mission I mentioned is Blitz Play, which is based on the armored car heist from earlier in the movie.
Oh, yes, like almost shot for shot.
Almost shot for shot. And in fact, the entire video game series called Payday, which the third game just released, was directly influenced by Heat. Actually, the studio co-founder of Overkill, Simon Viklund, even said that they have a map called Heat Street, which is a replication of Mann's climactic shootout throughout the streets of downtown LA. It's an entire video game franchise. So there's just something about that intensity, about those people, about escaping a possible odds, that it crosses all sorts of genres. It's remarkable.
I think there's something enveloping about the aesthetic and the world he creates. I would venture to say that Heat is probably the most influential crime picture since Brian De Palma's version of Scarface. Scarface has been an influence on some of the same video games that were just mentioned, Grand Theft Auto, in terms of even the way the characters dress. Scarface was a huge influence on hip-hop, on the look and themes of a lot of rappers and a lot of crime movies. A lot of gangster movies are clearly aping Scarface. And it's the same thing with Heat. It's something about the originality of the style of the movie that changes the game, and it makes others want to emulate it or do their own version of it,
successfully or not.
Exactly.
The fact that people, filmmakers, video game developers, artists of any stripe create references, whether it's just in the periphery or directly about or emulating shots from Heat.
Yeah, no,
is just a testament to how incredible the film is.
It's a really unique work of art, I would say, and you see that in the lingering, the way it hasn't aged, literally, because people keep going back to it. That's why, again, you can rank Heat with films like Scarface, The Godfather. These are movies that leave a mark on filmmakers who connect with it whenever they discover it, and it gives you a window of how to treat a certain type of character in a certain type of scenario with a rich lens.
A rich, sleek lens, too.
Yes. You even see the influence on television. I think a lot of TV shows still borrow from
without a
Heat.
doubt. Again, we don't want to be here all day.
Yeah.
But, Ozark, in terms of just the color grading and very methodical camera work.
Mindhunter on Netflix.
I'm sure Casa de Papel, otherwise known as Money Heist, which now has a spin-off in South Korea, it's become in Germany. I haven't seen it, but the idea that it's focused on these crazy bank heists, I'm sure the seed of the script came from Heat and other films like it.
Oh, yeah. I would even venture to say I'm sure in real life there are detectives out there who would like to model themselves on Hannah.
Well, speaking of real life, one thing we should mention, there were a couple instances we could find of crimes that were committed directly because of Heat that were modeled off of the movie.
There was the famous 1997 Hollywood heist, which resulted in an actual shootout in public between the cops and the thieves. And it's really wild because the bank robbers, the heist men, were dressed almost as if they were just modeling their wardrobe on Macaulay's crew in Heat, and their weapons too. At the time, it shocked the country because the shootout involved these guys wielding AK-47s and a lot of high-powered weapons that, again, similar to the shootout in Heat.
Well, apparently one of the robbers, Larry Phillips Jr., according to some sources, had a copy of the movie where he lived. Now, that could just be correlation, not causation, but based on what you just said, I'm sure he watched that on repeat.
Oh yeah,
In fact, this the 1997 North Hollywood shootout is considered one of the longest and bloody events of its type in American police history. Both robbers were killed. 11 police officers and 7 civilians were injured during the shootout. Heat was widely referenced during the coverage of the shootout.
Oh yeah, if funny enough, if you were a child at the time, and if you look up vintage news reports now on YouTube, you can see how news broadcasters used shots from Heat when covering the story. They would cut to those famous shots of Val Kilmer and Al Pacino shooting out in the street to kind of make the reference. And of course, there have been other armored car robberies that the media has compared to Heat in South Africa, Colombia, Denmark, and Norway. And the French gangster Redouane Faïd told Mann at a film festival, "You were my technical advisor." What more do you need to talk about the influence of this
Everyone
movie?
talked about Joker leaving a bad influence, but there's Heat.
There's Heat, yeah. But it's so common with really great crime pictures. If you read the book Stone by James Riordan about Oliver Stone, there's a fun chapter on Scarface where Stone talks about how mobsters have bought him free champagne around the world when they find out he wrote Scarface, and they tell him straight up, like, "Hey, your movie influenced my career." I don't know how he feels about that as a filmmaker and we assume responsible citizen, but to me it speaks to the impact of art, right? The impact of good art. That's how it is, The good art leaves a mark, whether it inspires someone to go become a detective or it inspires you to knock off an armored car.
Inspiration doesn't necessarily lead to a good or bad outcome or well executed outcome. It just means that a wide net has been cast. The French doors have been opened.
Oh yeah. And even the director Mia Hansen-Løve has said that she is obsessed with Heat, and said the themes of Heat actually are themes of my films, except in a very different way, in a very different world. And that actually connects nicely to what we just said, because Løve's films don't have really much to do with shootouts and crime. And there's crime, but it's a more kind of measured cinema. It's a more personal kind of filmmaking that doesn't involve big, expensive action sequences. But again, that speaks to the influence of a good work of art in many ways. So you can watch Heat, and okay, maybe you're not inspired to go do a big bank robbery scene, but you pay attention to how
the story is told.
The stories and the complexities of the characters, how a thief, a cop, don't always have to be written in black and white terms. It's not about like saints versus sinners.
Or need a cheap, traumatic backstory in order to make them more interesting.
Exactly.
It's literally their actions in the movie that tells you everything you need to know about them. And I know it just sounds so simple, show don't tell, but there's a reason why Heat is still talked about, emulated, referenced all these years on instead of other movies.
Yeah, we're not going to get any directors saying that about It Comes at Night or those kinds of forgettable genre exercises. It's a great film. If somehow you've made it to the 2-hour mark of this podcast and you have not seen Heat, almost 3, and you have not seen Heat, go check it out. Please go. It's available on Blu-ray. It's constantly streaming.
It's on Netflix now. It's on 4K.
It's on 4K. Like, come on. If you got a 4K player, please go get a copy. Those of you with nice hefty finances who have that 70-incher in the living room, pop this bad boy in, turn the lights down, and check it out. It really is Mann's masterwork. He's made a lot of masterful films, and surely there's going to be more to come. But every director, every artist kind of has that
if you get
defining
one
piece. Yeah.
If you get one, you're lucky.
Yes. This is a director that's made several,
which we've talked about, and we've had a lot to say. But this one, and the reason why it's getting its own episode, it's because it's clearly something that has obsessed him. He's thought about for so long, from even his days doing the TV show of Miami Vice, to LA Takedown, to Heat 2 as the novel, and now Heat 2 as the movie, and the films that he made in between, and the TV shows that he executive produced and worked on as well.
And the fact that he pulled it off, because, there's something, I don't know what you call it. It's almost like Apocalypse Now syndrome. You hear many directors talk about it, how when they embarked on their, I guess you can call their ultimate passion project, they were scared that it would just turn into a fiasco because it's so big, it's so much to juggle. Stone said he felt that way when he embarked on JFK, that he didn't know if this was going to be his undoing, his Apocalypse Now. Mann does it with Heat. He chases after his whale, his big whale, like Hannah, chasing after his targets. But he pulled it off. He ended up making a movie that is worthy of the passion put into it. It could have easily been one of those quote-unquote passion projects that ends up becoming a massive disappointment. And instead, it's his crowning achievement in the sense that no other Mann film is discussed as much. No other Mann film has left as much of an impact, even as audiences and film buffs keep discovering the rest of his catalog.
People know Heat as the movie before even the name Michael Mann.
Yes, exactly. There are, and again, I'll bring it up again. It's like Scarface. A lot of people know the movie without knowing Brian De Palma directed it, Oliver Stone wrote it, or they even forget about the original Howard Hawks movie from 1932 that it was a remake of.
And soon maybe a third?
Well, who knows?
Scarface one that has been up in the air for years?
Luca Guadagnino thankfully just dropped out of directing it, so we're not going to get his version, but I'm sure they're auditioning directors. Hey, Universal, our patron Salvador Carrasco is looking for a directing gig. So right now he's looking to do another feature. So he can do Scarface. But it's a special movie, and we can't say enough about it. As Sebastian just said, it's streaming on Netflix as of now. The way streaming works now, unfortunately, by the time you hear this, it might be on Amazon or somewhere, or
who knows.
But hey, you know what? Let's just listen to our modern guru, Christopher Nolan, and support physical media. So go get that 4K Blu-ray. Go get that.
If you get the Blu-ray, you get director's commentary, which will, if you like the movie, you'll love it. If you didn't like it, you'll appreciate it more than you did when first watching it.
Yes. So that was our big whale, Heat. Watch out for our follow-up episode where we will then dive into what followed Heat. I guess you could call it the remnants of Heat, because Mann, again, has been so tapped into this world. He then followed Heat with The Insider, which we already mentioned, but then he loops back around to this world that fascinates him so much, of criminals, conflicted men living in the underground, the women that get wrapped up into their orbit. And so we obviously cannot complete this cycle without discussing Collateral, Miami Vice, Public Enemies, this just grouping of haunted criminals and cops.
It's like the underground digital revolution.
Yes.
From Mann. Black Cat, I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering, what the hell is that? That's a good question that we hope to provide some answers to. But Collateral, part of why we structured our series this way, one, we knew that Heat was going to be a standalone, but we wanted to start our next episode precisely talking about Collateral, which takes place in Los Angeles, but it has a very different feel, a very different look.
Yeah.
It's a mirror image in a way of what we see in Heat. So it would be that nice connecting point to his work in the aughts.
It's almost like it's almost like these two movies are a love letter to LA, but in a very gritty.
Like I love you, but like there's also this whack stuff here.
Yeah. Like I love you, but you have flaws. and hey, you know what? That's how a good relationship works sometimes. And Mann's relationship to this city has yielded some really good stuff. And same with Miami Vice. When we get into Miami Vice, a lot of that film is almost like a love letter to the idea of Florida, of Miami, but with those glistening blemishes in the city.
It's a movie that, again, we're going to talk a lot about it, that over the years, I've very gradually grown to appreciate it more. When I first saw it, I was just like, I don't know about this. But over time, I don't know. It's definitely flawed. It's definitely not, it doesn't rank super high for me in the Mann filmography. But it's one that I think deserves a lot more respect than it has ever been given.
And it has proven to actually have a lasting impact in very surprising ways that we'll discuss in the episode. It's
two words, Harmony Korine.
Yes.
and that's what we'll leave you with for now.
If you know the name, you know where we're going to venture into. Well, that was our Big Heat episode. Be on the lookout for, as we just said, our upcoming episode on Collateral as we continue this special series.
Ferrari is
right around the corner.
It's right around. It's racing around the corner.
Let's just say we have the vehicle parked. we just gotta put the key in the ignition and get it.
Exactly. And we'll have more Do We Recommends. We're in the middle of the
big Oscar season.
There's a lot of stuff to catch up on, whether it's good, whether it's bad. We'll hopefully try and cover interesting movies, as well as on Instagram we have First Impressions. We just did one for Silent Night. John Woo, 77, just what a baller.
Another returning master, another like Mann, another pro just coming back to show the pups how it's done. So check that out. Remember to like us, subscribe. Please leave your comments. We know you're out there. We know you have opinions.
We know you have the opinions on the things we say.
Just put them out there. I know right now it's dicey to give your opinion on anything because of the conflicts.
Have people even heard our podcast? I think they know about dicey opinions. So please, no, seriously. Apple Podcasts, I think Spotify now has a place where you can write some comments. It's a new thing they added. Apple Podcasts, if you go to our page, you would call in Apple Podcasts, rate, review us. We read all of it. We love to read it. We share all this stuff together. We like to engage, and we like to engage with you guys.
Rate us as well. Give us those stars. And well, that's it. We're gonna turn off
the flame. For heat before we burn down the studio.
Thank you so much for joining us for another dive into the Chronicles of Mann.
Episode 4.
Woof,
we are in the back end.
There.
A little over now. So.
And if you haven't heard the other 3, check them out now. Those are right now on our pages.
Go for long walks.
Yep.
It will be a good companion.
And then check out the movies.
And that's the most important thing. Be inspired.
Exactly.
Take care, everybody, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.